Better start over. It is 8:31. I will call the July 3rd, 2024 Environment and Land Use Committee meeting to order. Roll call of members. We'll just go around the room. You want to start, Kevin?
Whalen.
Tony Munson.
Dave Larson.
Randy Severson.
Kellen Nelson,
Andy Todd.
and then and Stacy
Stacy Clyde.
and staff.
Mark Carlson.
And Susan.
Morning, Susan Fisher, Corporation Counsel.
I certify that open meeting law requirements have been met with proper posting. We have a 14-item agenda. Are there any changes or additions?
Motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Has everyone had a chance to read through our May 1st, 2024 regular meeting minutes? Any corrections or additions to that?
I make a motion to approve. I didn't catch anything scanning through it.
Okay,
I'll second it.
made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next, I will call a public hearing to order for a conditional use permit for a farm home business accessory for Larry Kruger, landowner petitioner in town of Albion. Randy, would you read the call?
Yes. You are hereby given notice that the following conditional use permit will be before the Environment and Land Use Committee on Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024 at 8:30 a.m. in the County Boardroom of the Courthouse, 18600 Hobson Street, Whitehall, Wisconsin. The hearing requested by Larry Kruger, landowner petitioner, Oliva, Wisconsin, is to consider a conditional use permit for a farm home business accessory located in the southeast one quarter of the southeast one quarter, section 6, township 24 north, range 9 west, in the town of Albion, Trempealeau County, Wisconsin. Parcel number follows. To provide public comment on this hearing during the meeting, please call 715-538-1894. Your attendance and comments are encouraged at this hearing. If you are unable to attend and have any questions, please call Mark Carlson with the Department of Land Management at 715-538-1919 or email at mark.carlson@county.trempealeau.wisconsin.us by July 2nd, 2024 at 4:30 p.m. If you are unable to attend and desire to submit a written comment, please send your written comment to the Department of Land Management, 18600 Hobson Street, Whitehall, Wisconsin, 54773, or email to Mark Carlson once again by July 2nd, 2024 at 4:30 p.m. Please know that written comments will be read at the public hearings up to 250 words. All written comments must include the name and address of its author and the request that the letter be read at a particular meeting date. Any special interest groups or expert witnesses will be allowed 20 minutes to give a presentation and must register at least 1 week prior to the meeting date by calling Mark Carlson of the Department of Land Management at 715-538-1919. Sincerely, Mark Carlson, Zoning and Sanitary Specialist.
Thank you, Randy. So once again, this is a public hearing. If anyone wishes to testify, there's sheets in the back by which to sign. Otherwise, let's see, Burgess, or Randy, or Mark.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Larry's, proposal is he takes these sheds and he refurbishes them, and the township noticed it and was brought to my attention. Even though it's kind of a unique business, we don't have any businesses that are specifically listed in our ordinance. We thought the best thing to do would be get a conditional use, put a couple conditions on as, maybe the number of units he can have there at any given time. I do have a letter from the town, theirs is 2 is what they're requiring or recommending. And then they have a few other items about the construction of it. I don't know if we really need to be involved with that, but that's a discussion to have once I read the letter. But I've only gotten one inquiry on it. It was a neighbor across the road, and all she was doing was asking for information. It was in the paper, you know, for the allotted time. I didn't get any other correspondence on it. I guess, you know, this has kind of been an ongoing thing, you know, with him doing things and the town being concerned and then bringing it to my attention. I just think this might be a resolution of some of that, I guess. And I guess as far as, you know, we need to, I would ask that the parties stay on task of the conditional use permit discussion only, because other issues might be brought to our attention too, but they're not really pertaining to the conditional use.
Okay, that's fair.
And Larry is here.
Okay,
Sherry Nelson is actually here also.
okay.
So,
Sherry, you had signed up to comment on this. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Not at this point, other than our letter.
Okay.
I mean, it pretty much tells it all. But I am available for questions.
So is there anyone else who would wish to testify to this public hearing? And would you read the letter? Oh, Larry, would you come up to the podium?
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, the letter was dated May 20th. Larry Kruger appeared before the Albion Town Board during its regular meeting on May 14th to request a conditional use permit for his property located at W28054, US Highway 10, excuse me, in the town of Albion. Mr. Kruger is requesting a conditional use permit for remodeling small buildings on skids for use as cabins. After careful consideration of the facts and circumstances, the board passed a motion in favor of granting the conditional use permit with the following conditions. No more than 2 cabins can be located on the property at any one time. All properties shall be on skids. Cabins shall not be sold as residential units and can be used as cabins only. All cabins shall be pre-wired. No cabin under construction or completed may be occupied either short or long-term at any time. And Burl left his number on here for contact. Sincerely, Sherry Nelson, Albion Town Clerk.
Thank you, Mark. Larry, do you have anything you'd like to add thus far?
Yes, a little out of my comfort zone here, so
It's okay.
I hope you bear with me. It's something I do every day. I'm trying to figure out,
Yeah, feedback from something. Oh, okay, I think we got it now.
yeah, I'm trying to figure out exactly why I'm here. Prior to buying these 2 cabins, I called Mark and got his permission to do this, and he said, you know, no, I don't want to step on Mark, but he said they don't regulate portable buildings. I have a nephew that's a town chairman right to the west of the town of Albion, and they don't regulate. I've talked to other people. They don't regulate portable buildings. So after this all happened, then Verl gave me a call. He wanted them out of there. So I asked him, well, if you have a problem with it, Verl, could you give me just a number of weeks or whatever? I'll just remove the 2 cabins. He says, no, we're going to get you for $450 for this permit. So, you know, here we are. If I can continue to go on with this, so then I met with the Town of Albion board. I called Sherry on a Thursday night and asked if I could get on the agenda for the town board. She says, no, you can't. And I said, why not? She says, it's already been posted. I said, Sherry, I was down to the town hall. It has not been posted. She hesitates for a minute and says, okay, I'll put you on the agenda then. So these are some of the struggles. This can get real broad, but I don't know how much you're going to let me come through with.
It'd be nice if we kept it to what's pertinent to this.
I'll try, but
Condition.
this has been, I've owned this place since 1998, and I've struggled ever since because of a town chairman. Just whatever I do, I spent, just to give you a background, after I bought the place was just in shambles. Manure pit there, I tore that down. There's an old farmhouse there. I took that down. I wanted to make the place look nice, which I have did. But I spent in excess of $150,000 doing it. And I wanted a way to return my money for that. But the town chairman has not allowed me to do that. See, this is how we get away from it. So I went to the board meeting, and right away when I got to the board meeting, Sherry Nelson started in on me about some tomatoes that were sold at my farm. It's a rental property there, of course. And I said, well, I'm not aware of that. She says, you know, that's illegal. And then after she says, but I'm not sure of that. So then, you know, I talked to Verl about, can I just remove these 2 cabins to avoid the $450 that I got to pay for this permit? That wasn't allowed. And I'm going to lose my line of thought here just because it gets so frustrating for me. So then she went on about every building I had on the farm. She wanted to know what was in the barn. She wanted to know what was in the pole shed. I have 2 cargo trailers there, or yeah, that's what I would call them. She wanted to know what was in them. So I asked her, I said, what voice do you have in this? And she wouldn't answer me. So it went on, and I got the approval from the board for the conditional use permit, okay? And then I get the letter from that. Would you guys like to see that letter? I do.
We have it.
We have it.
Is that the one that Mark read?
Yes. And she's got me down for 5, what do they call it here? Things I can't do under that permit. Could somebody read those?
I think Mark did.
Mark did.
A few minutes ago.
I read them into
They're in the record.
my introduction.
Sure. So after I get this letter, there's 4 more that are added into it that I don't know where it came from. But yet she writes in her letter here that was all approved, a motion made, it says in the letter, and approved by the board. Well, that didn't happen. So I got to talking about, you know, what I was going to do with these cabins, and my wife were out there working on them, and had a charcoal girl out there and was staying overnight once in a while. She says, I'm not going to allow that. So in her notes there, number 5, all cabins under construction or completed may not be occupied either a short time or long term at any time. Now, I'm asking, I don't know what I'm asking. Is that legit? Can I stay out there overnight? It's the stupid stuff, but it needs to be addressed.
That would be up to this committee to establish what conditions to put on. That's what they recommended. That isn't necessarily, it may or may not be what this committee decides to.
And then
apply.
she's put in here then that it wasn't approved by the board, that they all had to be pre-wired. Well, one of these cabins has 100 amp service in it, and I wanted to change it over to 200 amp service. Well, that's going to stop me from doing that. So how can what is the scope of my conditional use permit? No matter what I want to do, they're going to shut me down.
Well, that's something this committee will talk about, really, so.
Sure.
Okay. I don't know. At this point, Sherry,
like-
you had registered, what, go ahead.
I'd like to give you a more broader picture of this, but I don't know if you're going to allow me to do it.
I don't know if it's going to pertain to what we're digging into unless the
No.
committee feels otherwise.
I understand this conditional use permit was for doing these cabins and allowing me to store stuff in my buildings. But for 29 years, that hasn't happened because Viral Deeds won't let me. So how can I cover these issues? And, I did receive a text message from Sherry yesterday that I'd like her to explain. Incidental renting of agricultural buildings for boats, trailers, RVs, cars are allowed. So for 26 years, I haven't been allowed to do that because the town chairman won't let me. So she goes down through here then. No rental of agricultural equipment is allowed. I'm zoned agricultural. Why can't I put agricultural equipment in the barn and in the pole shed? How do I deal with these issues? This is my problem. And who can solve it? It hasn't been solved for 26 years.
I'm not sure that this committee is equipped to deal with all those issues.
Oh, wait a minute. Anybody seen this letter? This letter, I took off today for this. I took off whenever this letter arrived on my window out at the cabin. And here's what it says. This is Dave Michaels from the Trempealeau County Zoning. I have been trying to contact you about this property. We have been contacted by the town of Albion to look into this matter of this residence. Please contact me at 715-538-2311, extension 32. Then it goes on to say, this is an urgent matter. Please contact us to stop further action. So I leave work. Now, I work down here at the sand mine. I drive a dump truck. So I left work to go back and try and get this resolved. When I got back, I went out to the farm. I called Mark. I read the letter to him. He says, what? I said, he said, could you send me a picture of this letter? I said, well, I'm from the old country. I don't really know how to send you that picture. So I went over to my brother's house. He sent Mark a picture. And the logo on top, when I brought it over to my brother, is Badger State Sheriff's Association. So he looked that up online and gave him a call. They're extremely concerned about it. This is a bogus letter. They're extremely concerned about it. So they called Trempealeau County Sheriff's Department to look into it. Now, the frame of all this, I'm just thinking, what is this all about? This is 26 years worth of this that I've been unable to solve. And unless somebody takes action on this, it's going to continue. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we may have questions, or we'll see how things go here. Sherry, you've registered, so.
All right, which app do you want to use?
Okay, most of that I'm not even going to address, except for I know nothing about tomatoes, nothing. And I never refused to put them on the agenda. He called I'm not in control of the agenda. I told them I needed, it was posted, and it was. I needed to check with Verl, and then I put him on the agenda, I believe.
I'm not hearing this properly, she got a.
And I did ask him about the cargo trailers because, and what they were being used for, because at that point, why I asked is that I wanted to know if he was also refurbishing them to be used as cabins. So yes, I did ask him about them because we were trying to get the scope of the way the thing's laid. And I never said I wasn't going to allow him to stay there, ever.
Why was it in the letter? Whoops.
And we had nothing to do with the letter. He's been holding up absolutely nothing, and I would encourage the sheriff to go ahead and check into that. As far as what's in the letter that I wrote this based on the meeting where we approved his conditional use request with these conditions, which is why it's a conditional use permit. And all of this was approved by the board, not me. I'm just the person that wrote the letter, and it's in the minutes. So you can find everything in our minutes, which have been approved and published. I guess our concerns in limiting the amount of cabins and things there has to do with the type of business and what's happening with these cabins. And,
It was my hobby.
right. So, and we do not want anyone living in them, whether or not he stays in them for a night or whatever. That's not necessarily the issue, although short or long term, I mean, I guess you can call a one night short term, but if it's the owner, it's like pitching a tent. But, you know, if someone's staying there for an extended period of time, no. So we do not want them occupied.
I agree.
And then, as far as the wiring and pre-wired or whatever, generally, our thoughts are is that, you know, when you come to wiring and things, that should be done by a, a certified, or I don't know how they license them, but an actual electrician.
I would have to have that done by a licensed electrician.
Well,
Yes. All right, thank you.
I mean, maybe Dave can help me out on that. Are they, how do they, can he talk?
At this point, yeah, he can speak. Yeah.
Are electricians
Yeah, it would be a
licensed?
contractor or somebody with the state certification.
They're
And that would be
certified,
through the
okay,
permitting process through land use,
right.
as I understand it.
Don't understand the
to
exact
make any-
terminology, but thank you,
Any changes in electrical.
thank you. So I did not make up any of these conditions. These are what we talked about as a board. And I wrote, they're in the minutes. What else? That's about it. The storage is a whole different issue, but just to address that, I went over it with Mark, and everything he said is actually in your rules. What do you call them? Ordinances. And I'm open to any questions if anyone has them.
Okay. At this point, is there anything else we need to bring forward in this public hearing? Before
I would
we-
just say that this is a way of us clearing it up and having Larry be able to do his thing with his buildings. I guess as far as the town's conditions, I mean, they're, like you said, they're recommendations from the town. I think the only one that would be enforceable with a conditional use would be limiting it to what they have too. I mean, we could say one. I mean, but then some of the other stuff, you know, would be addressed as, like, see, I'm leery of someone saying they're gonna use it as a cabin, because we look at it as a cabin as a dwelling, so it would have to meet everything in code. So that would be addressed with their concerns. So, I mean, I don't know, think that needs to be a condition, because it would be addressed if someone tried to use one of these things for. And I mean, I know Larry's been frustrated and the town's been frustrated. I just think this is a way of trying to at least put some closure to it. And if he stays with the 2 or less, and you know, as far as the building goes, like, it is a different topic, but it is an allowable use that, you know, could be allowed. And I just hope that this conditional use permit, if it is passed, would kind of bring some closure to all this, I guess. So,
Thank you, Mark. If nobody else is here to offer public comment, I will close the public comment period at 8:57. And I'll open this up to questions, comments from the committee. Dave?
I guess, I don't know, technically, do we have to offer the motion to approve before we start discussing, or do we discuss first? This is a committee meeting, we can go either way, I guess.
You can go, you know, as it is a public hearing, if the public hearing is closed, you can go straight to discussion.
Right, okay. Okay, yeah, I've been somewhat involved with this too. I think I was the one that initially suggested Larry attempt to get a conditional use to try to resolve some of the issues on both sides. As far as the town's conditions, I see a couple of things that I would like to see added to. As far as the one with the cabins shall not be sold as residential, I don't think that's our purview. Especially if he sells it to somebody in another county, it's not our issue at all. So I don't know about that one being in there. The cabins being pre-wired, I think pre-wired or wired by a certified contractor with proper permitting. I think that part could be added to that to clarify that.
I'll bring you back.
No cabin under construction or completed may be occupied either short-term or long-term. Maybe we need to clarify that the owner can stay there on occasion. If he starts moving in there and living, there's going to be no sanitary for it, so any long-term could not be tolerated. But for an overnight stay, I don't see any issue with that, and maybe this line needs to be clarified in some way in regard to that. All I've got on this particular issue.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the committee members?
One,
Yeah.
just to clarify in my head, as an owner of a property, can't we stay on our property no matter what conditions or matter how it sets up as I mean, you can camp on your own property for months if you wanted to. Who cares where they stay? So that's kind of where I'm looking. You know, I don't know if there should be a condition on the owner staying at their own, but even if it's a cabin or they put up a
I
big
was
tent.
going the other way and
Yeah,
making sure it's allowed, rather than trying to, where somebody could use this to say you can't stay overnight here. The
Gotcha.
way this is written, I was trying to go the other way to open it up a little
You're
bit
kind of on
more.
the
Gotcha.
same page on that, really.
yeah, I think we
Yeah.
are, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
But as far as camping for a month,
Right.
if you're gonna camp on your own property for a month, I think you have to dig a privy hole and all that sort of stuff. I'm not totally aware, but there has to be some allowance made if you're gonna stay that long.
Right.
So,
And what that time period is. That's
Right, yeah.
Mark?
I guess, you know, the way our ordinance reads, if we look at it, this is a dwelling. You can't have more than one dwelling on a piece of property. But we're not gonna go around and hunt people down that are camping on their property for a few nights. I think that shouldn't even be addressed as a condition, because that can be addressed elsewhere in the ordinance. And, you know, same with the wiring, that would be addressed with UDC. You know, I think, based on my opinion, would be just to limit the number of cabins that he can actually, or I don't even like to call them cabins, but call them whatever you want to call them, to only, like, go with the town's approval and say 2. Because we know, if we don't put something like that in there, there could be 10 of them sitting there, all randomly sprawled all over the place. And then some of the other stuff would be addressed with other avenues of our ordinance, you know, rather than making it a condition and saying he can do this or he can't do that, and so, that's just my 2 cents on it.
That's then the questions with that, the item 2 on there about requiring all of them to be on skids, is that?
I mean, I don't think that's a necessary condition for us to address as a conditional use. What we're addressing as a conditional use is the actual working on these things and refurbishing them. I don't know if we need to put restrictions on how they're built, I guess. You know, we don't do that with anybody else, and require things to be on a skid or,
Okay, I'm getting hypothetical.
they just, I think they got their purpose on the skids is it's gonna go away, it's
Go away,
movable.
right, yeah,
You
and
know, that's, and we would address that too. There's no way we would say, okay, you're gonna put a cabin on your property and put a foundation and all that stuff on it, you know. The skid thing, I think it's the town's way of, and Sherry can correct me if I'm wrong, it's the town's way of making it sure that it's a removable piece of property that is gonna go down the road.
When it's repaired, it will become a saleable item and
Right.
to be sold and
Right.
whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
Randy?
I was just going to agree, I guess, with a lot of what's been said. I find like, the limiting the number of cabins, pretty pertinent. The rest of it, the language, and I find it pretty ambiguous and troublesome and, unenforceable really, because like the wiring, then would they have to come with a certificate of inspection? Just saying pre-wired just means there's some wire there. And, the skid thing, a lot of those little buildings, they don't actually have skids. They come, they're meant to be put on something. So they don't actually have skids. And, the owner occupancy of the property, I have an issue with that too, so.
Okay, any other discussion? Otherwise, I'm gonna let Larry speak again quick. Go, Larry, why don't you come up to the podium and we can address,
I've lived in the town of Albany my whole life. I'm not gonna, you gotta have 200 feet of frontage to do all this kind of stuff. So I'm not gonna do that. I've bought them this cabin I bought was UBC done on it. You people know what that is? Uniform Building Code. Right. So everything was inspected. The wiring was inspected, everything was inspected, this was approved. So for me to try and defend something where I'm gonna pull a bogus on doing some wiring myself or whatever, I wouldn't do that, because if I did, I'd be liable if something happened. So I'm well aware of all this. And as far as me living in them, no, there's no way I can do that. I'm not that disconnected. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
thank you. Anyone else, any other comments from the committee discussion?
I have a question,
Perfect.
and I apologize, my connection's been a little shoddy, but has there been an issue with people staying in the cabins?
Are we aware of issues of people staying, Larry?
Well, when I went to the meeting, if I may come
Come on
forward.
up,
When
yeah.
I went to the meeting, town board meeting, Verl accused me of that. I had somebody sleeping there, he said. So then, I think he reported that. So then I asked Verl, I said, if you think there's somebody sleeping there, instead of reporting me, wouldn't it be better? There is a person on the board that lives 1 mile from that. I said, do a little investigation, see what you can find. But no, he wanted to report me to dirty me. That's all I have, thank you.
Stacy, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like there's, a lot more going on there that doesn't really pertain to the committee and what we could do here, so,
Yeah.
I guess I do agree with, some of the other, what all the other things that have been said as far as, having some wording that does put some parameters on this.
Okay. Okay, where would we like to go as a committee?
I'm a little bit confused here with Mark's statement about not regulating. I'll go back a little bit with Larry talking about wanting to upgrade from a 100 to 200 amp service in this building. Now, you're saying we do regulate that anyway, or we don't?
I mean, if someone builds a garden shed, all we permit is the shed itself. If someone wants to use it for a cabin, and it's basically a shed that's being refurbished into a cabin, and they put it somewhere, it's looked at as a dwelling and has to meet all the UDC requirements, which would be wiring, insulation, all that stuff. The conditional use that we're talking about is just for him to be allowed to bring those buildings in there and do whatever he does with them and then sell them and get rid of them. That's what the conditional use permit is for.
But now, the do whatever he does is the area of ambiguity to me, where his suggestion, upgrading a service, that in any case should be,
I would say wherever he brings these things or wherever they're going, if they require it to be built to a certain code, they're gonna have to prove it at that point,
okay, so we're saying it's not our concern.
I would say not for the conditional use, it's not a concern. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
It's kind of buyer beware type,
Yeah.
I think, in a lot, in that aspect. I know,
I'll tell you my comment later off
okay,
record.
fair. Okay, so, conditions that the committee would like to impose or request. Mark, what would be your official recommendation?
Pick out of the bunch that town of Alvin would limit the number of things he can have there at one time.
Okay.
And some of the other stuff, I guess, in my opinion, would be addressed at the time of whenever they're permitted where they're going, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Okay,
And I'm going the same direction he's going, so
okay.
that's my opinion.
Any other thoughts on conditions to apply?
What about the item 2, instead of saying on skids, to remain portable?
Yeah.
Would that be fine? That would probably be reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of all encompassing, I guess, something
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
So
So,
I'd suggest changing that to that verbiage.
all buildings to remain portable.
Yeah.
That's logical.
I mean, the only other condition that we put on some of these things is like hours of operation type things, but we haven't really, I've never heard anybody say anything about
I
him
don't
being
think that
out there.
applies in this case.
Yeah, I don't think, he's not gonna be out there at 10 o'clock at night beating on a hammer, and I don't think it applies in this case, but those are the kind of conditions that we had put on stuff like this.
Okay.
So we're talking about leaving item 1 and 2 from the town boards in there with the adjustment to the item 2 and drop the other 3. Is that where we're leaning?
That's where we're at right at this moment.
Well, I will make a motion to approve this conditional use permit with item 1 remaining intact, item 2 from the town board be changed to remain from the wording of being on skids to shall remain portable.
Second the motion.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any other discussion on this motion? Hearing none? Call the vote. All in favor of approving this conditional use permit with those 2 conditions, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Your conditional use permit has been granted with those 2 conditions. Thank you. Okay, at this time then, I will call the public hearing to order at 9:10 for amendments to comprehensive zoning ordinance. Randy, would you read our notice?
Please take notice that pursuant to state statute 59.69, para 2, para 3, para E, Wisconsin statute, the Trumpealeau County Environment and Land Use Committee will hold a public hearing to make minor amendments to the Trumpealeau County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, which are as follows. Number 1, petition by the town of Albion to reinstate the allowance for transfer of density. It was formerly 3.04. Number 2, amendment to Chapter 18 with the new definition regarding transfer of density. Number 3, amendment to Chapter 3, Section 3.07 regarding height requirements. Further, please be further advised that this public hearing will be held on Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024 at 8:35 a.m. in the new county boardroom of the courthouse located at 18600 Hobson Street, Whitehall, Wisconsin, 54773. Prior to the public hearing, copies of the proposed minor amendments may be viewed or obtained at the offices of the Trumpealeau County Department of Land Management and the Trumpealeau County Clerk at 36245 Main Street, Whitehall, Wisconsin, 54773. To request that a copy of these amendments be mailed, please contact the Department of Land Management at 715-538-1919 or email at mark.carlson@county.trempealeau.wisconsin.us. The zoning ordinance amendments may also be accessed and viewed online at www.county.trempealeau.wisconsin.us. Written comments will be accepted by the Environment and Land Use Committee until July 2nd, 2024 at 4:30 p.m. Comments may be emailed to Mark Carlson at, once again, his email, or mailed to the Department of Land Management, 18600 Hobson Street, Whitehall, Wisconsin, 54773, but must be received no later than July 2nd, 2024 at 4:30 p.m.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Again, if anyone, I have 2 people registered to testify in regards to this public hearing. If anyone else wishes to, please fill out this form in the back, and we'll make sure that it is read. Mark, or whose hand? Mark, yeah.
I guess, this was, if you recall, Kevin Whalen wasn't on the committee at that time, but we did bring this back to the table a few months back, with the original language, and it was a tie vote, so it failed. So we went back and came up with this new language here that kind of clarifies a few things and allows it, under certain circumstances. And, we worked with land records, the surveyor, and we all kind of came to an agreement that, if we were going to allow this to be added back in, it would be with this language here. And I guess if it doesn't, people don't feel like it needs to be backed in, then it should just be not brought back in, I guess. We don't really want to go back and try to reinvent the wheel with language because it was discussed and we felt it was kind of addressed. Because I think the committee had some concerns about, some of the items that were added to the language. And, this was brought to our, this Township of Albion actually requested this change, a few months back, and we're just kind of following up with the additional language to describe it a little bit more clearly and have people be able to do it under certain circumstances.
Okay. All right, thank you. I guess at this point, we will hear from the public. First, I'm going to have Gary Gibson, that you registered to comment.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm the one that brought this attention to the town, because the situation, what I had is I've got a 35-acre parcel that isn't continuous. It's across the road from my other land. It's not, I got close to 400 acres altogether, but this 35 acres is on the other side of the road. And with Egg 2, it has one residential or one housing unit attached to it right now. Being that said, I wanted to deed 5 acres just to my daughter and her husband to build a house on, which wasn't allowed under the way the current rules are read in the zoning. They could build there if they had the whole 35 acres, but you can't split 5 acres off because the other 30 acres under the way it's read now, they say you're creating a parcel or a lot that has no density left on it. That's true or not true depending on how you look at it. It doesn't have any density left on it in Egg 2, but it's not an unbuildable lot. That's what they're always saying, you can't have an unbuildable lot. It's not unbuildable, it's just not buildable under Egg 2. So in the future, it could be rezoned into something residential or whatever. So I'm in favor of this. I don't know if it's written the right way or not, or if it's gets more involved than what it would be if we just took the 5 acres off, left that in residential, or I mean, excuse me, Ag 2, and then in the future, it could be rezoned. It just wouldn't be buildable under Ag 2. So to make this work, because it says transfer cannot result in any parcel having 0 remaining residential density. So to get through that same place where I want 5 acres and to make it work, I'd have to transfer a unit from the other side of the road onto this property. And the only way I could do that is go across the other side of the road, put a 70-acre plot so that I can transfer 1 unit over to that side of the road. So now I got a 7-acre lot on the other side of the road. It's attached to my other property. Because of where it's at, will never be buildable because there's no road access. I shouldn't say there's road access, but there's no driveway accessibility. And that's where got to this anyway, because you say, well, he's got all this land. Well, there's no driveway accessibility across the road or on the same side that my house is on. I do have property on Highway 10, if you want to build a house right on Highway 10, which I don't want to, and probably most people don't. So I'm in favor of it. I don't know, you know, instead of just involving and the whole thing's not going to change the housing density at all. The 35 acres with 2 lots on it, leave the 30 acres in Ag 2. That's not going to change the housing density there because it's going to take the 35 acres up. You're involving 35 acres. If I'm reading this right, and that's the way it is, now you're involving 105 acres to get to the same place. So I'm not sure this is the right way to do it. And the other question I have too is, there should be something in here like to reverse it. So like if you're trying to buy ag land from somebody that is in the same situation, say somebody bought 60 acres, built a house on it, there's a 40-acre field on it. Under the rules, they can't sell that 40 acres to me as ag land. Well, they can, without rezoning, they'd have to rezone it to primary ag or rural residential to be able to sell that 40 acres to me. Because if they built the house in the last 20 years, they've only got, on that 60 acres, they only got 1 unit, so they can never split that without rezoning it again. So there's some issues here other than just transferring density, I think. I mean, this can work, but it gets to be a lot more, there's gonna be a lot more paperwork involved here than if you did my first scenario where I got my 35 acres, I build a house on there for 5 acres, you leave the other 30 acres in ag, it's not buildable. You know, it's still a buildable lot, just not buildable under Ag 2, okay? That's how I look at it, so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Sherry, you had also registered. Hear from you at this time, too.
First, I guess I agree with Gary about a lot of unresolved issues remaining. And I do not clearly understand the 0 remaining density, but I guess my question is I currently have 204 acres. Under your current things, how many houses could be put on that?
Depends on what the zoning is on.
I think it's
'Cause if you
Ag
take-
2.
So you take so
Probably
many
Ag
acres
2.
times whatever the residential density is 8, and then that comes to a number, and then you divide that by 40. And that becomes the number of houses it can have.
So if I have 200 acres and divide that by,
So I'm just trying to do the math in my, you're probably looking at 3 lots or 4 lots maybe at the most.
on 200 acres.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have my calculator with me, but I guess you take the density times whatever acres you have. Say the density was 35, times the 200 and divide it by 40.
Well, so if you took, let's say you had residential 8 density, 200 acres times 8 would be 1,600, right?
Yep.
Divided by 40.
It's 40.
Yeah, for residential 8, yeah.
All right.
So,
For
But-
residential 8, it would be 40 houses for two.
But if
Right.
she's got 35 acres, you take that times 200.
so anyway, there's a formula. And
I'm
that
asking you what
that is what our zoning is based on.
So I can't do it like one per 35 acres or 40 acres or whatever.
Well, the thing is, you have, to split it, to make 2 lots, you have to have 70 acres at least.
Right, so,
Because if you're making 35 and 35, you have to have 70 acres.
right, so if I split the 204 into
Okay,
70 acres
Okay,
each,
so let's move beyond that. What's your point in asking that question?
I want to know how this affects how you figure out who can build what, where, including myself. I mean, I'm using myself as an example to understand how you calculate this.
Well, it's in our ordinance. We can
Right.
explain it to you in our office. Do we need
Right.
to go through all that here?
Well,
I
I
guess.
want to understand it so I can address the way you put it.
Can I
But-
ask a question?
Basically, you're saying you need 35 acres.
It depends on what the zoning is on that area.
Yeah,
Now, like,
it's a,
Town of Hale rezoned to.
Right.
4 per
Right.
40. So they're gonna be able to build 4 houses per 40 if they have that much acreage.
It's like 1, take 200 times 1, density's 1.
So our zoning is
so what's the,
density-based,
what's the?
and part of it is
Give me
to,
the formula.
whatever acreage times whatever the zoning is, divided by 40. And that's in our ordinance.
So I think with the example of 200 acres, the density on exclusive ag is 1.
Right.
So 200 divided by 40, you would have 5 on that example, I believe.
That explains it, thank you.
That's, and then you'd all have to have frontage. That's a whole nother ballgame.
No, I understand.
But I mean,
understand, believe me, I understand.
it's been a
all
while
that.
since I did math on paper.
We're not going
but,
there, but I do agree with the
Randy.
frontage, but that explains it.
We had a
So
question.
I do, though, agree with Gary about a lot of unresolved issues.
Okay. Hang tight.
I guess I was just thinking that it was pretty hypothetical until, because you were, we weren't quite clear if you were talking about selling to others to make these lots or just for the, say, how many houses would go there, and,
Well, I think, I don't plan on selling anything ever, but it's just, if I were, I'm just using myself as an example to understand.
It's every issue is its.
I
own,
agree.
yeah,
They're
case by
all
case.
different.
Dave
I'm
has
just
a-
gonna say, I think this, what's the word I'm looking for? The two are talking over each other. Sherry is specifically thinking, I believe, of remaining in Ag 2 zoning.
Yes.
And what would happen, not, you mentioned other zones, I think that confuses the issue for Sherry, rather than keeping it strictly in an Ag 2 scenario.
Yes, I do not want to, I'm not talking about rezoning anything. I'm just talking about as is. Thank you.
Okay. Gary, what, you can make another comment?
Just to be on the record, I don't need this anymore because my daughter and husband bought a house in Eau Claire County, and so there's no rush.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so if nobody else wishes the public, I guess, you have a letter from the town, I believe.
Well, they had a letter requesting it, and that was read at the last meeting.
Okay.
And I could read it again, but I mean, it's
Probably not.
basically, there's no, they're the ones that requested it, I guess.
Right. Okay. If there's nothing else, then, for public comment, I will close that at 9:25 and open this up to the committee for discussion. on the transfer of density.
Nobody else has anything? I got a couple points. Under the information we received with the transfer density with the pros and cons. Item 2 under the pros, it's not to allow more homes, but to allow one home. I think that, I'm just pointing out and under the cons of taken out due to complexity, my understanding at the time it was due to lack of use and complexity, but lack of use seemed to be the primary discussion. Just those couple points on that information.
Thoughts, concerns from the committee? I know we've discussed this at some length in other meetings.
I guess I don't have any more to add. I mean, I know the pros and cons were just items we discussed, trying to prove one way or the other why we should put it back in or why we should just leave it alone and not put it back in. As far as the wording of it, I mean, we can nitpick that, I guess, but right now it was just kind of a tool for you to look at to see what the good and the bad would be of putting it back in.
Okay.
I have a comment.
Randy, go for it.
It seems very tricky with these land transfers and, unless I'm wrong, it would be putting a restriction on some parcels that got the density removed, and I'd be and maybe Joe was here when we discussed it, I can't remember what his opinion was, but I wouldn't mind hearing from the surveyor on this again.
And then Nick's got his examples of
Other-
how it looks when they actually do it, I mean, I think it's complex and we deal with it, somewhat, and I just think how the public feels about it,
Yeah.
And, I mean, if someone has hundreds of acres on one side of the road and they're transferring it over to something smaller and it's probably not an issue, but say you got a 40-acre piece on one side and then you do have, but that's right in the language, you can't bring it down to 0, so, but that's not saying that somebody can't buy that 40 and put a house on it and have a 40-acre piece.
Right. Joe, do you have anything to offer?
Previously, it was a transfer of density across roads or adjoining property that had different zoning. That's pretty much the way it started and stopped. That left a lot of questions open, obviously, what's raised these issues for staff. There were a few instances where transfer of density was used, and these cons kind of came up from the school of hard knocks of trying to deal with these. And if you look at, there's 3 options basically here. One is to do nothing, leave the ordinance the way it is. The other option is to go back to the original language, which I think some people have recommended. And I think the third option is to allow a transfer of density with adjoining lands that addresses the issues that staff has in trying to keep track of this stuff. And when we look at this stuff, the difference between transfer of density with the new language, let's call it, and transfer of density with the original language is, as far as the process, it's virtually the same. Because the only difference is this spells out what you'd have to do to actually transfer that density. I mean, transfer of density in the old language wasn't as simple as just saying, we're going to transfer one, and now you can build your house and you get a permit. There had to be a mechanism to show that one was transferred, which required a transfer of density form, which is required to be at the Register of Deeds office so it could be tracked in title searches. If you have three densities across the road and you want to transfer one, well, obviously you have 2 left. If you have 1 density across the road and you want to transfer it, well, then you're leaving a piece of land that has virtually no density, can't be built on, can't be used. I would have a hard time buying it, let alone selling it. So what this does, the new language takes into considerations that the committee had previously. I think somebody mentioned it should only be ag land. Somebody mentioned it should be 1 density. And while putting the language together, we discovered, well, you can't take one away from one that only has 1, right? And so that's where the zero density language came in. You cannot reduce a parcel to zero density. That being said, if the committee decides that they want to do the transfer of density issue, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think staff is fine with that, if that's what the committee chooses, but we recommend using the newer language so that this can be tracked better. We get calls in the office. When somebody calls and says, well, what can I do with this property? And we get it all the time. People stopping at the counter or calling. If we have a transfer of density under these guidelines and a mapping requirement that gives staff the ability to look at documents to be able to tell people over the phone what they can do with their property, that may be something that could work much better than just the transfer density is allowed.
Thank you.
If I can ask a question?
Sure.
The new wording that's printed in our information, is that what you're recommending can be done? Or are you saying something different than that yet?
Well, that was the foundation to basically discuss.
Okay.
And obviously, the committee can take a look at that and make recommendations. And I think staff would be willing to look at that and discuss it.
I have a question.
Stacy, go ahead.
So, Chuck, do we have situations throughout the county where density has been transferred and we have a parcel with zero density?
Right now, I don't believe there's zero density on any parcels.
Okay, and then if that did happen, could that be rezoned to give it density, or how does that work?
Well, that's one of the cons. If you,
Okay.
that is one of our concerns. What do we do with existing parcels that have the density transferred away? Basically, what the individual who transferred the density would be asking the committee to do is rezone the property to open up the door to more density. So it's kind of like, once you transfer away, somebody in theory could ask the committee to, well, let's bring it all back.
Yep. Okay.
Which is, quite frankly, in my opinion, a rezone would have solved this issue. So if we're gonna have a rezone to fix a transfer that was done after somebody decides to change their mind, essentially, why didn't we just have a rezone to begin with? And we wouldn't be here today.
Fair comment, too.
We have the issue of a town board. And what they feel is their prerogatives.
Well, and boards change too,
Eventually.
in time. All things change,
Yep.
so.
And that, that also is, we have to think about the whole county as a whole, not just what one township wants to do.
Correct.
And like Joe said, if we would have just been able to rezone that 35-acre piece, he could have split it up and been done with it, and I think the transfer density thing, it gives him a little bit more allowance for someone to do it in the future. Unfortunately, he's not gonna be able to do it because things have changed. Or we just not do it and just don't put people in a situation where they might be stuck with something they can't use what they want to use.
Gary's got a comment.
When the town did their comprehensive zoning, way back when they did it, this tool was available. They figured that was part of what they could use in the future. You guys took it away from them. So now they gave you the right to zone them, and now you took away one of their tools. All they're asking for is that tool back so that they can keep their comprehensive plan and do what they want to do with it. That's all they're asking.
Okay, thank you. Well, thoughts from the committee?
Anybody else? Oh, well, look, I see a finger in the air. So,
Oh, Mark.
Kellen, can I address
Yeah,
how
please
we're
do.
tracking in the office? So how it was in the past when these documents got recorded in the Register of Deeds office, either we got notified by Verge or Mark, or I was able to discover them. And so the question that came the last month or 2 months ago was, how can we track these internally? And so Ann and myself were thinking of ways that we can track it internally, but also put it out there on our county website for the public to know that there has been something happen on this property that they need to further look into. So currently, right now, we're working with our website vendor on having a separate layer. It's not gonna be part of the zoning layer, but it's gonna be a separate overlay layer that, if we can make it possible, is gonna be automatically on when someone goes to the website. So if they don't wanna see the overlay lines of this particular area, they're gonna have to toggle it off. We felt like if it was automatically on, it's gonna be more noticeable instead of someone knowing that they have to turn that layer on. Just because in our staff discussions, we want to, do what we can to ensure people of what they're looking at with the property, but also they have to have their own responsibility of a buyer beware situation. So the example that I have up on the screen was a case in the town of Albion where a landowner transferred some density. So if you think of how the zoning looks at parcels of land, so if you look at the exterior boundary all around in purple, that's one parcel of land for zoning. So that's all contiguous ownership for that same owner. Where the difference is the road that splits through the property, that actually creates two separate zoning parcels. If the road wasn't there, they just would have one zone parcel. So what this particular owner needed to do was, they wanted to sell off this part right here where this house is. Well, when I click on this polygon here, it's a total of 36.413 acres. So in order for them to make that parcel division, like Mark and Verge were talking about, they had to figure out in that formula what they can do, because by default, this area had one unit, correct, Joe and Mark? So in order to divide this off, they had to transfer from this larger parcel, which was 279 acres. So they went through the process of the transfer of density and got that document recorded. So now internally, we went ahead and created this layer. So like when I click on this larger parcel, it's got, the date that I created it, my name, and then it says 1 unit from this tract. And when you look at the recorded document, they called on the recorded document, this is tract A. And then we put the document number that can be referred back to that document in the Register of Deeds office, and then the total number of acres on this polygon. And that's the same thing with this one here. It's tract B from that document, 1 unit to this tract. We didn't want to get into the weeds of saying how many units are currently on there or not. We just wanted to make sure that people knew that 1 unit was transferred to this, 1 unit came from this. And it's the responsibility of the parties involved to determine how many units are really left over. So this is the way that we're looking to track this internally. And then in the tax and assessment program itself, I put in the notes field that there was units transferred with the document reference, and that's also out on the website. The problem with that is it's not searchable for that. So we wanted to have a way that was somewhat searchable, but it's really difficult to be able to search for this. That's why we wanted to have on our county parcel online mapping, that layer automatically turned on, because you just can't search for it. So hopefully this kind of goes back to the earlier discussions of the complexity of when units can be transferred or how it is, and we're trying to simplify it the best we can. But the question that came to us in land records, can we track it? Well, we can track it.
Okay. Tracking, yeah, that was one of the original questions we had a couple months
Brings
ago.
back to my comment early on, we have very qualified staff that can handle this.
Yeah, I think the part that can be difficult is when I go to, say, an earlier one. I think this was actually the very first one that we had in the county. Bear with me here. and this is, I think, in the staff recommendations on the, in the pros and cons list that we had, was that this area down here transferred 4 units across the road so they could create 4 separate CSM lots. And I think in the recommendations that we had was only to transfer 1 unit. The reason being that we felt as staff was, you can go ahead and do this and not have any town approval. So if we just transferred 1 unit, you're not potentially creating little mini subdivisions that the township has no control over. So I think that was part of our recommendation, was only to have 1, so you wouldn't have a case like this here where they transferred 4 to create these 4 lots here. So that kind of explains that part of, on that pros and cons list.
A couple things. It's still, I mean, I get now there is some tracking, but even your explanation of the new tracking is complicated. And, you know, what happens in a situation where a landowner has a parcel that's in 2 townships?
Well, we would still track it the same way. It would just come to, the case of, because we're only requiring this on ag land. So in that area, in the township, say it's the borders of the town of Hale, where the town of Hale changed everything, majority of it to rural residential. Well, then, now that formula is gonna change then.
Yeah, but like if you, that example you had with that big transfer of that big,
Yeah,
then there's gonna have to be a boundary, to say this part of this parcel still has density, this part doesn't.
I think, Rick, I think what would happen is, as far as this goes, as far as the ordinance goes, and as long as it's the township in Trempealeau County, I don't think there's really an issue. Because it would still maintain, the township boundary is there for a lot of reasons, but not so much for zoning, right? So basically, let's say any one of these examples Nick has, a town line ran right through it, as long as they're both ag zonings, it wouldn't make any difference. Now, if you want to throw a wild card in and say it's a township in Eau Claire County, that's a whole nother story.
yeah, I think, Gary brought, or not Gary, but like Larry brought up earlier in the prior testimony about, a township to the west. That, how they regulate things. I mean, how we regulate here in Trempealeau County is gonna be different than Jackson and Eau
Yeah, that's a
Claire.
Buffalo County township besides, so I mean,
Yeah.
it's a whole different county,
Yeah,
different rules.
but interior township to township, it just would come down to the zoning. And really, in our recommendations, we're restricting this only in the ag zoned areas.
I believe this was originally installed was to protect ag land, so that if the non-buildable 40 or non-buildable parcel would protect it all as ag land, you're transferring all that population to one designated area, which is what we wanted to do originally. Not overpopulate it, but yet to preserve the ag land. And somehow, all the language to satisfy people, it got messed up. Because this was the safety net for some townships to do that. And it got removed.
And that is, quite frankly, the principle behind density zoning.
Correct. But that was also to control it, where we wanted the density, where it should be closer to municipalities or whatever.
Right.
Once again, lots of good discussion on the subject. I'm not sure that we're any further along, though.
Well, I don't know, does anybody else have anything they want to, at this point, I'm ready,
I'm ready to vote.
I'm ready to make a motion to vote on putting, no, we're doing this strictly the Town of Albion one, the other 2 will be a separate vote,
We can
vote,
do it
or are
that
we
way.
voting to do all of them?
All
So
of them.
we need to discuss them before we vote.
According to the way the agenda reads.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, next item then would be chapter 18, new definition regarding transfer density, which I think we kind of discussed in the inclusion of the first one. So then, chapter 30, section 3.07 regarding height requirements.
I guess I put that one in there because we had a co-op that was gonna be building down in the town of Trempealeau, and they were asking questions about heights and all that, and I dug into the ordinance, and I'm not changing the language, I'm just putting it back the way it was initially. And it's basically, you know, it makes reference, in the old language, it makes a reference to subs 2, 3, and 4. Well, there isn't even a 4 in the old language. So I've just reworded it all and numbered it more correctly and I'm not changing one single word in the actual language. It's just configuring it,
Changing the format.
the format of it, yeah. And that's all that is.
Okay.
Make it a little bit more understandable, because it was kind of a little, especially when it references to something that's not even there, you know, it's so, all I did was change it and number it to the way it was before they changed it. I don't know why they ended up changing it, but that's strictly all this is just kind of the format and the layout of it, no wording changed, no additional, anything added, so that's what that is.
Okay.
I just
So-
have one question, just information, I'm not questioning the point. The part that for each foot you go up, you have to have one more foot of setback.
That's what it says in here, yeah.
So, starting after 35 feet, so do we have something in there that I missed that says the first one must have that much setback per foot into the first 35 feet? Is that?
And all it says in the ordinance of, you know, 1 additional foot for every that's why, I didn't change anything.
For everything
it's just-
above the 35,
Yeah.
but what controls the first 35?
I think it could be the required setback, it needs to be like a 10-foot, you know, but anything above that 35, it needs to be, say it's 60 feet, you know, then it would be
Well,
60
see,
feet.
something won't quite compute here. Okay.
For 10 feet, we got 20 feet landing over, and
Yeah.
we're worried about
Yeah.
anything over 35 going.
It's like
Right.
cell towers are required to be 200 feet from a property line, and then they'll come up with some voodoo to say it's gonna crumble into a 50-foot
Right.
radius, but, I guess, like I said, I didn't rechange the way the ordinance was written, but I guess.
That I didn't see where that,
Didn't make sense, 35 feet with a 10-foot setback. Don't
right,
make sense.
right, yeah,
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, but the intent wasn't to change any of the language, was just to make it more readable.
Okay.
And I guess
So the-
if someone comes in for a permit, you know, we'll just interpret it at that time, if it needs to be 60 feet away, or it needs to be 35 feet away, or 45 feet away, because originally it has to be 10, and for every extra, you know, we'd have to look at that time, so.
Okay.
To me, that should just play on the safe side and be whatever the height it is away from the property line. That's kind of what I would like to see,
I think all of us would agree with that.
That would make sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't take out the neighbor's house, you take your own out, but.
Seems reasonable to me. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on that discussion? Otherwise, that does complete in my opinion, we've covered all 3 amendments. So I entertain a motion.
I will make a motion to accept these, or whatever the proper term of the 3 items on our changes to the zoning ordinance as presented in our printed material.
Motion made. Do we have a second?
I'm gonna go ahead and second that.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any other discussion from committee? Hearing none, call the vote. All in favor of approving this motion to approve the language as presented, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Move forward with that. So, thank you to staff and Town of Albion and whatnot, Gary. Next on our agenda is item 8, which is a presentation from Solar Stone by Mark Mauersberger. I believe he's going to get set up at the moment.
Here's some cards.
His PowerPoint did go into your packets this morning.
Yeah.
When he sent it to me, so they should be in your computer packet.
All right.
Okay, sure, certainly.
Can I trouble you for someplace where I can sit, because I've got a bum leg, I can't stand for a long time. Right there?
Sit there.
We can put it out for you.
Thank you.
See if I can get this Zoom call merged.
Which one is that public?
Hi, everyone. How's that? Better?
Do you want to, is his mic on? You want to put his mic on and pull it down maybe towards him?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Mauersberger. I'm with Solarstone Partners. We're looking to develop a project here in Sumner Township in your county. And the reason why I wanted to present to you today is it's a standard practice as I work in these communities to engage with the county, the township, and the city. I've already had a meeting with the township back in May 14th. This is my meeting to kind of update the county of what we're up to. And then I have a follow-up meeting with the city on the 9th. So it's still in the very early stages. I have a brief presentation that I'm going to provide, and then I'll open it up for questions. But a lot of the information I'm going to be giving you is very preliminary. I like to say these projects are living, breathing creatures. One of the slides talks about a COD date, commercial operations date, and I highlighted specifically because when I did present to the township, I said 2026, but because of the information we received from MISO, who controls the transmission, it's probably more like 2027. So without further ado, again, my name is Mark Mauersberger. I'm the VP at Solarstone Partners of Utility Development, and here is our brief agenda for today. I want to give you an overview of the company, give you a brief Solar 101, landowner community highlights, project area snapshot, summary of project benefits, and a Q&A. So this is our team of developers. We've got thousands of megawatts of experience throughout the country. Specifically, I have spearheaded the development with another company at Wood County Solar in Bear Creek, which are nearby. If any of you have any questions about how I develop projects personally as a developer, feel free to contact any of the folks over there at Wood County and also Saratoga Township. So our team of experts, as I mentioned in the previous slide, we have a great deal of experience in this space. Utility scale power, solar, smaller solar gardens, land acquisition, energy storage integration, GIS and resource mapping, transmission interconnection and delivery, and many other skill sets. Our partners and customers are commercial and industrial, investor-owned utilities, cooperatives, munis, state and federal utilities, landowners, project host communities, and county leadership, which is why we're here today. So why are we doing solar, and why are we interested in doing solar in your community? Fossil fuels, price uncertainty, and of course the decommissioning of many fossil generation plants are causing this need for added power. Solar prices have declined dramatically over the last several years. Demand from utilities who want to have a huge amount of their portfolio be devoted to renewable energy, and of course consumer demand. One of the questions I often get asked about renewable energy in general is how does that compete with my local coal plant or natural gas facility? As you can see on this chart, this is published every year by Lazard. It's a levelized cost of energy consumption without subsidies. So you can see solar is very competitive when compared to other sources of power generation. And of course, it has the benefit of being clean energy. Solar in traditional agricultural processes. I spoke to some landowners recently, and they talked about wanting to hear more from developers about how solar kind of integrates with traditional agricultural practices. So I found this great blurb from Renew, who's an NGO that promotes renewable energy within the state of Wisconsin. And it really does a good job of kind of giving a snapshot. So we're growing more crops today than we were 35 years ago, and doing so on fewer harvested acres of land. Crop yields are expected to continue increasing, and it's already putting pressure on an oversaturated marketplace. Some crop producers are looking far and wide for ways to generate revenue, additional revenue streams from their current land positions. Federal taxpayers are paying to take cropland out of production through the U.S. Conservation Reserve Program, CRP commonly known. Today in Wisconsin, nearly 200,000 acres are not in active cultivation to improve soil health. Reduce the volume of crop produced and manage oversupply. According to a recent study done by Evolve Energy Research, achieving 100% clean energy in Wisconsin, 2.3 gigawatts of utility scale solar would be needed to achieve decarbonization of the economy wide by 2050. Assuming 1 gigawatt of solar uses 7,000 acres, the total land area needed for utility scale solar in this scenario is just under 200,000 acres, which mirrors what's in CRP currently in Wisconsin. Landowner benefits. So there's a number of landowner benefits for participating in solar. Significant revenue increase over current farm and land income. Stable and predictable long-term income that provides diversification or a hedge against the volatility in agricultural commodity markets, which we've all seen. Ability to maintain family legacy by continuing to own the land and pass it along to the next generation. I've worked in many different counties in many different states, and the common refrain I usually see is kids don't want to take over the farm, they're not interested in this business. What do I do? Or probably on a more positive spin, I have landowners telling me that these types of projects help keep the farm in the family, and this hedge against the volatility of commodity prices and the uncertainty of market has really been a boon to a lot of these families. So how do we do that in a very comprehensive and meaningful way that protects the land as well? We have vegetative management plan that ensures the land remains in a dormant state while allowing the preservation, replenishment of farmland for continued use at the end of the project life cycle. So we basically promote soil health through using pollinators and other types of practices. Project will use material less herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizer, typically required by today's farming practice. So what's the solar development process? How does it work? So photovoltaic cells, PVs, convert sunlight into electricity. The inverter converts the DC electricity into AC, which is what we commonly use here in the US. Electricity is distributed on the electrical grid. The grid provides clean energy to our homes and businesses. Typical solar equipment. These solar panels are made mostly of aluminum, glass, and copper wiring. There's companies now that are quoting that they can recycle up to 95% of these solar panels, so they're very environmentally friendly. Single axis tracking rack mounts, which follow the sunlight throughout the day, is what we commonly employ. Height is 8 to 10 feet, depending on land grade. Bifacial panels are a bit taller. Bifacial panels, basically what they do in our region, they're specific to our region, is on one side of the panels, you collect the solar energy, and then it tracks the sun as it moves throughout the horizon. And then the photovoltaic cells for a bifacial panel are also on the reverse side of the panel. So if there's snow on the ground, it reflects up and creates additional energy. Inverters convert power from DC to AC, and those are centrally located throughout the project. These panels are kind of toe-held into the ground. It's not like a wind project where you have these large foundations with rebar. These are held into the ground very superficially but solidly. All the power is wheeled to an inverter, which then takes it underground to a common hub, which transmits the power throughout the network. Land use summary. Integrated landowner, interested landowners with relatively open contiguous parcels near utility infrastructure is what we're looking for. Minimal, if any, impacts to wetland, floodplains, currently sensitive areas or threatened and endangered species, culturally sensitive areas. That would include cemeteries, that would include Native American areas of cultural sensitivity, archaeological sites such as pioneer sites would all be considered in a cultural study that we would do. We'd also do environmental studies and also studies on protected species like bats, butterflies, and that type of thing. Like I mentioned earlier, the project requires 6 to 7 acres of usable land per megawatt. A 100 megawatt project requires approximately 600 to 700 acres of usable land. So we plan around other existing easements on a property such as pipelines, utilities, adjacent landowner easements are all considered in the development. So Osseo Solar, general project area, as you can see, the project's about 89 megawatts. That comprises about 800 acres in Sumner Township. Project will be permitted through the county here. Interconnection application was filed with Mid-Continent System Operator, which is MISO, who controls our transmission in our region. And construction is estimated to be in 2027. Like I mentioned earlier, I highlighted that because in the last presentation we were thinking 2026, but further delays in MISO results have pushed that back a bit. And we have to consider, of course, our winter seasons. So local economic impact to the county. As everyone knows, there is a really unique and, in my mind, the best way to do it when you're looking at these types of projects. Many states will apply what's called a nameplate capacity to the production of the project, and then they'll aggregate that money to the county and townships and so forth. Well, in Wisconsin, we do it in a unique way where the money kind of stays with the host community. So in this particular formula for utility aid payment, which is also called a production capacity payment, for this 89 megawatt project would be $2,000 per megawatt. 2/3 of that would go to the county, which is $119,260, and 1/3 would go to the township, which is about $58,740. And that's on a yearly basis. Summary of key benefits. Again, I mentioned the Wisconsin utility aid payment, clean, safe, renewable energy that will power thousands of homes, solar energy resilience and security with the Wisconsin power grid, meaning distributed generation. All your power isn't in one place. There was an interesting study done, and they reported on it on 60 Minutes a couple of years ago, and they interviewed the head of FERC, and the interviewer said, isn't it true that because of how our energy in this country currently is so centralized through fossil fuels, that if we took out 15 substations, or if a ne'er-do-well took out 15 substations, wouldn't that make the grid collapse? That's what this analysis revealed. And the guy from FERC said, no, it's less than that. So having distributed generation or power in multiple places, power generation in multiple places is good for security. Solar is silent. It's a revenue generator, as I mentioned in the earlier slide. It doesn't put impact on your water system, your school system, your roads. Project will use materially less herbicides, pesticides, fertilizer, typically used in traditional farming practices. Local labor for long-term maintenance of the facility, plus educational opportunities. In the project I developed in Wood County, we actually had a carve-out where students could pull up, review the site, and also get educational opportunities as well. We as a company offer that. I've gone to the local high school here in Osseo, gone to their energy events, also had several meetings with them. There's a great deal of interest at the high school in regards to solar, and they have a pretty impressive solar program that we hope to support in the future. And to that end, when I'm back here on the 9th visiting with the city, I'll also be meeting with some folks from the school board to talk about ways we can collaborate. That's all I have. I wanted to run through it because I know we were running a little over time. If anyone has any questions, now's the time that I'd be available to answer those.
Does anyone from the committee have questions?
Mark, I have a question. Locally, how have the adjacent landowners, support groups, community service agent groups, how have they responded to the possibility of having their neighbor be a solar farm?
It's a good question. So up until recently, I would say about March, I hadn't heard a lot of feedback from the negative point of view, hadn't seen any of the signs that we're seeing, hadn't heard any negative feedback from landowners adjacent to the project. I usually solicit that information. I'll say to the landowners participating in the project, hey, are you hearing anything in the community? Anybody causing any concerns? And even when I reached out to Mark initially, I said, are you hearing anything? He's like, people are just wondering what's going on. And he just started, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but you had just mentioned when we spoke a few months back that you had just started hearing this and you thought it was an opportune time for us to discuss this. So the answer is no, but subsequent to about March, I started hearing more, and usually when we're doing these projects, we like to kick off due diligence in an orderly fashion and not just jump into it with both feet. The reason why we do that is because we don't want to get people's hopes up and get people thinking about, well, we're going to get this nice revenue from this utility aid payment, and then there's a defect with the transmission. We can't get the transmission, or we're doing our environmental studies and we find something that's a fatal flaw. So I don't want to get people's hopes up too early in the game in such an immature project, but I felt because of some of the feedback I was getting around March time that I really needed to launch my public outreach earlier. So that what's kind of conveyed my want to meet with the township, meet with you all, and then also meet with the city. And then also in additional engagements, we're going to be sending out newsletters and we're going to be having landowner-focused meetings and also community meetings throughout the summer. And I'm also going to be providing educational opportunities and engaging with the high school and getting any feedback from them if they have any concerns or questions about what we're doing. In addition to that, what I've traditionally done on other projects, when the project gets to when we know it's certain, which will probably be about fall, we'll get some really solid results about transmission. I'll do a door knock campaign about a half-mile perimeter of the project. We'll note all the house locations, and then we'll split up with like a 5-man team and kind of do a door knock campaign. These are all common practices for public outreach, in addition to postcards and other types of ways we can engage with the community. But if there's landowners that want to have ex parte meetings, kitchen table meetings, we're always available for that type of thing. I live 2 hours away.
Okay. My question, had some members of the Sportsman's Club in Osseo
Understood.
ask me because they were voting on
Yes.
information at their local meeting.
Yes.
How has that turned out? I haven't followed up on it yet. I knew you were coming.
Yes.
I thought that'd be a great time to ask. Is it something that's
Great question.
available?
Great
Okay.
questions. Yeah. So the gun club, I had gotten onto this project probably sometime last summer, and after that time frame, I had been dealing a lot with Steve, who was the chairman or the president of the gun club, and was speaking to him very regularly. I was calling him on a regular basis saying, hey, look, can we get meetings? I want to do this. We want to do this agreement, so on and so forth. And through those discussions, we had what I believed was a really solid proposal where we would not be impacting the gun club's operation. We would be burying the cable. There'd be no above ground structures, just so we could connect landowner parcels that we already had under lease. So it was just a cabling agreement. Throughout that iteration and throughout those discussions, I had given a couple of presentations. My predecessor, Derek Hansek, who's our CDO, Chief Development Officer, he had given a couple of presentations and walked the land as well. And then we had negotiations with the gun club's attorney from about January. They had finally retained an attorney in January, which we thought was a terrific advancement of our discussions. We then had moved through those discussions into about March time period where they called a special meeting. And frankly, I was quite surprised when they said that They voted against it, and Steve told me, and I don't want to speak for him, but roughly, the feedback I received, well, let's not attribute it to Steve, let's just say the feedback I received that was a common refrain was that the members of the gun club that lived adjacent to the project convinced the members that the larger membership that they didn't want it, and so they voted it down. And I can sort of understand that. I've been members of gun clubs myself. I'm a shooter. I love outdoor sports, hunting, all that good stuff. So I can understand if I was in their shoes, you know, it's not benefiting directly. So why make an enemy with your fellow club member? You know, so
Right.
I'm sure that's how it worked out. But I don't consider that to be the end of the project. Obviously, we can find alternate routes and also even do some slight redesign issues to get around that. But yeah, that was heartbreaking.
I was
but
just checking what
it's
the
all
conclusion
part.
was.
It's all part of the business,
Right.
you know. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a living, breathing thing, and it changes over time. So as long as you keep people up to date and let them know what's going on, you usually don't have a lot of pushback.
All right, I was just concerned how it turned out,
Yeah.
because I know there was some questions.
Yeah, I mean, we would do that deal tomorrow, and there was a lot of concerns about, you know, impacts to the gun clubs. I think one of them was water. Another one talked about magnetic fields, and we offered, and we're very open about having third-party professional pre- and post-construction testing to make sure that those weren't issues. And to the broader county as well, as we engage, and this becomes more mature and more of a reality, as we engage in discussions, one of the things that I did with great effect when I was dealing with Wood County, and you can look at the agreement itself on the, if you go to the PSC website and you punch in Wood County Solar /docket, you'll see the copious amounts of research and due diligence that goes in before these projects are built. And within that permit, you'll see that we entered into what's called a developer's agreement with the county, which if there's any issues about water, if there's any issues about how the payment will be conveyed, and, you know, because they had a concern, well, what if policy changes and it's no longer utility aid payment, how can we guarantee you're gonna give us that money every year? We codified that in a developer's agreement, and there's many other line items that might interest you all as well. But if there's any concerns within your constituents, we can codify that and quantify that within a developer's agreement, and of course, within the permit itself.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Dave, go ahead. Stacy, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, I was wondering with the energy that's derived from this, does that stay in the area or is it transferred elsewhere?
I always like to say it's like any other crop you make in the area. Whatever can be utilized locally, it is, but most of it will go outside of the area towards what we traditionally call in the business load or population centers that can use this power to a greater extent.
Two questions. One, I've heard some, at this point, I'll call it rumor, in regard to rent payments. Can you give us some kind of a sense of how you determine a rental offering, where your average rental might be, or anything? Can you give us any information along that line?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's basically based on real estate value and energy prices. Those two converge to create what the lease rate is. We also will contemplate what interconnection costs might be, and then that's all goes into a calculator, a pro forma, and then we kind of decide what we can feasibly afford to pay a landowner. I can tell you that the rates that we're paying here are very common to what we paid on some of the other projects I worked on in the States, in this state, meaning Wood County Solar and also Bear Creek.
I've heard rumor of rentals rates in the rate of 2 to 3 times the normal rental rate for cropping the land. Is that a total rumor and total falsehood, or is there some legitimacy to that statement?
That's a really good question, and I wish it had a simple answer. There used to be a 2 to 3 time multiplier on this, but the numbers have gotten so bananas and out of control and untethered to real estate values that It's that plus, let's put it that way.
Okay.
It's more, what we do to determine what we can offer is based on some of those fundamentals I mentioned earlier, but it far exceeds what they could generate off the land, growing traditional crops, or leasing the land.
Follow-up, why don't you consider purchasing rather than leasing if the rental rates are as high as some of the numbers I'm hearing?
Because it's difficult to get widespread acceptance on selling. A lot of landowners don't want to sell.
Okay.
And it makes it cumbersome or tricky when building the project or advancing it, when some land is owned, some land is leased, so on and so forth. So it's just cleaner and better to have everything be contiguous, either all purchase or all lease. There are situations, I mentioned earlier, our company is also involved in the community solar garden space, which is unusual. Most companies either focus on community solar or focus on utility scale. We do both, and so because we do both, we kind of have access to both types of scenarios. In some cases, buying it makes sense from the smaller CSG or community solar garden space, but in the utility space, that's not really done very often where large tracts of land are bought for this purpose.
Okay.
Not to say that we wouldn't be amenable to it, it's just not practical.
Okay. The next, this is probably a little early in the discussion for this, but you did bring it up. Your surety bond, that is what you use is bonding, or do you attempt to get letters of credit and that sort of thing for your surety? Or is it an insurance bond?
It's what traditionally happens in this space, and obviously that's up for negotiation with the county, but generally what happens is you get a third party to come in and give an assessment of the value of the equipment. And then they'll subtract salvage value and they'll say this is what the bond should be. The bond's usually put in year 10 because in year 0 to 10 you've got an equitable asset. Like I mentioned, we're not concreted into the ground. You can carry these away.
Yep.
So they're a valuable asset and they have long-standing warranties on them, so they're gonna be valuable to whoever the owner is. So from that point of view, you know, after year 10, we'll put in the bond and then we'll update it as time goes on to cover inflation and those types of issues. And that will be in place throughout the lifetime of the project and will be something that would be attached to the permit. So if for some reason that bond wasn't in place, you could shut us down.
Yep.
If we had an agreement regarding you know, impacts to XYZ, water, I've mentioned water testing, but you know, other studies we do are like glint glare to make sure that the panels don't provide too much glint or glare for air traffic. And it's not really a problem because these panels are designed to absorb light, not reflect it. And it's a well-known fact that these panels actually reflect less sunlight than like a body of water might, for example. So for that example, you know, we want to make sure that the money's in place, the money's updated, and it covers the project, and that would live with whoever ultimately owns the project. For this particular instance, our partner is a private equity firm called Matrix, and they would own and operate it. But if they chose to sell it to an Amazon or Microsoft, they would be duty bound to all the same conditions of the permit that we would. Any other questions? There's a question from.
I had another.
Go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, I was just wondering, and I know where we're at on the timeline on this and just in solar in general, but have you come across times like where we're seeing that the land is transitioned back to in the condition of it?
That's a really good question, and there hasn't been wide-scale decommissioning of these projects from the solar space, but I have seen it from the wind space, and generally it's been orderly. There has been, I don't want to speak for the wind industry, although I've had a lot of experience in that industry, but a lot of the issues, rather large, you know, if they're large or small, they're generally, let's call them medium-sized issues with decommissioning because we're learning this process. Our country, you know, just if you kind of trace back to when this renewable energy push really took off, it was around that 2007, 2008 time. So we're still pretty young in the development process and learning, what works and what doesn't. But from those particular instances, any of the issues that they did have could have been mitigated with proper planning at this level. But to answer your question succinctly, no, there hasn't been widespread study done that I'm aware of on post decommissioning site recovery because our industry is so nascent.
Tony, it looked like you had a
You
question.
mentioned most of these are sold to a utility. You're saying a private could purchase this then?
The power's ultimately consumed by a utility, but the owner could be, and also the way a company like an Amazon or a Microsoft would use this power is they would do an energy deal with the local utility to consume that power. I was talking to some folks the other day. One of the projects I developed in northeast South Dakota was a wind project. That project was sold to a company called Engie, who sold the power to Xcel, who then did for a 20-year tranche, and then they did a 10-year tranche of that 20-year tranche, a deal with Google for a data center they were building. So it's energy trading, and how the power gets ultimately consumed is done both on a physical basis and also on a market-based basis.
So everybody's got to make a profit, so it ain't going to make electricity cheaper. It's just creating more electricity, ain't making it efficient.
Well, it's actually very efficient. Like I showed on that earlier chart, if you built today, like I'll give you an example of we were talking about wind a second ago. One of the larger wind projects I had worked on 2019 timeframe was in northeast South Dakota. That project was 300 megawatts. That was bought by Xcel and the power was consumed by Xcel. If that project was a coal plant built to today's standards, it would have cost 3 times as much. And then we, the ratepayers, would be the ones paying that difference.
But the foreign companies are building 2 to 3 coal and natural gas plants compared to what America's decommissioning, so we're not really offsetting the global pollution problem.
Well, I can't speak for what other countries are doing, but what I can tell you is this. Countries in Europe, for example, I was just in Europe a few months ago. I have family there. I go there pretty regularly. I always like to joke, if you want to know what stuff's going to cost 5 years from now, go to 7-Eleven because their prices are increased sufficiently to give you a window into what that's going to look like. I would say the same thing about energy. You go to a place like Europe, Germany specifically is where my family is from. I remember going there as a kid and we're driving down the Autobahn and seeing wind turbines go up, and then we're driving down the Autobahn, we're seeing solar panels go next to the wind turbines, and while I was there this last March, you're seeing battery going next to that, and they have a very robust energy mix. They have the biggest economy in Europe by far. A lot of people predicted after the Ukraine war that they would be hurt substantially by that because they relied heavily on natural gas to offset the intermittency of their renewables. They doubled down in renewables, and their economy is doing just fine. So I think smart people in positions of authority will find ways to make things economical and also productive.
Why can't we put them like along the interstates or whatever, or government-owned land or public lands or whatever, where the travel corridors are, where the demand is for some of these charging stations or whatever, instead of, as you said, putting on our prime ag land, which you said it takes 200,000 acres in Wisconsin would be to offset the electricity. We have that much in CRP. Well, now we just took 400,000 acres out of commission. Why can't we just either take the CRP or put it in less quality land instead of taking our prime ag land?
I also said it was a fraction of the total land mass in the state. So it's.
Well, it is a fraction of the land mass, but yet the land mass is not productive in Wisconsin. There's only a certain percentage that produces crops.
Yeah, but you have to remember, when I was driving here, for this meeting, I'm driving by fields and fields of beautiful corn, and I think we all understand that a substantial amount of that is used for energy as well. Anywhere from 40 to 45% of the corn we grow in this country are used for energy purposes. So it's 6 1/2 dozen, but this provides good, reliable energy, and I think it's. Excuse me, sir. So yeah, to answer your question, Putting this on public lands, we've tried that. We've also tried putting it on native lands. Putting it in the right-of-way isn't very practical. I think it was mentioned at my township meetings, why don't you put it in the median between the roads? It's a great idea, but, you know, I think from a liability standpoint, that would probably be very difficult to do. And when I've engaged in discussions with public entities regarding leasing their land, there's a lot of barriers to being able to get that done in an efficient and widespread manner.
Have you guys instituted many in the Twin Cities, which it seems like that's your point of origin, as far as any of the parking allotments and such? Have you guys investigated that at level? Because here we have a large amount of ground in an urban area that is used for parking. And then to put the solar panels above an already utilized urban area, it might actually be a benefit for you also.
I can do you one better. We've even looked into coal plants, you know, like decommissioned coal plants.
Right.
And using some of that land, because the common parlance would be the infrastructure's there, the land's there, but some of those sites are so contaminated with coal ash that the cleanup completely destroys the economics, because we would be duty bound to clean
Right,
that up.
because you own the land after you read it. I'm just talking about utilized, if you're gonna be having energy usage to have it produced where it's grown locally, energy usage. We enjoy the idea of the economics, of course, but as far as someone who is used to having a farm be something that grows crops or livestock.
Sure.
When you put a solar array on cropland, there's concerns as far as quantity. And that's, I just want to emphasize, I know it has no impact on a lot of what you guys are doing, but we're just emphasizing what we have to explain to the constituents of Trempealeau County, why we're giving up available productive area to satisfy the energy needs of people that are many miles away.
You grow crops for people that are many miles away as well, you know, your
And
corn,
we-
beans, and so on and so forth, and it's all a function of the marketplace, right? So to your point, we would gladly embrace non-traditional areas to site these farms. It's just that parking lot situations and, you know, may not be adjacent to ready available transmission or a ready available substation where this is. These substations and these transmission lines and this infrastructure were deliberately placed in areas, in more rural areas. So that's where we now naturally gravitate to. We tried creative ways. As I mentioned, the Wood County project.
Right.
I was developing that project for another company during COVID. So nothing was easy in getting that project done, but I can tell you this, that particular project was sited creatively, kind of to your point, on timber that was grown there for the mill in Adams Friendship. And as I think most of us know, that mill shut down during my development. So I had nowhere to go with the timbers. The alternative use for that land, which caused quite a bit of controversy in that local community, was the landowner was going to clear the timbers and build a CAFO there. So there was quite a community war going on. Our project was quite the compromise because it gave the landowner the ability to profit off the land, but also the community was able to not have a CAFO, which they found far more objectionable than our use. And then we used the standing timbers. We did about a 50-foot buffer. It's all in that PSC docket I told you guys to look up. But we did a buffer around that area, so the visual impacts were less extreme than you would have in some other types of energy, like a wind turbine or a coal plant or something like that. So the community was happy with it, so much to an extent that they were allowed to do another 150 megawatt project right next to it called Saratoga Solar. So I helped set up the land and got the permit going, but I subsequently left the company after that. But that kind of is a really good, and feel free to contact the people at Saratoga Township and in Wood County. They'll tell you about how this kind of unfolded. But that's a perfect example of how you can take something, to your point, that is actually causing controversy or isn't very productive, and turn it into something that unites the community. Because I think the community, based on their acceptance of another phase, kind of dictated the fact that they weren't disappointed with what we did.
All right, thank you.
I guess to address Mr. Whalen's concern, you're talking large scale where you need transmission, you got large volumes of, he's talking more local scale support for like, say, this building or whatever.
Sure.
Put it over the parking lots where the infrastructure's here, whether you use your batteries or inverters to convert it to support this versus large scale to export to Milwaukee, Chicago, or
It's-
whatever.
It's a much different business, put it that way. So I had mentioned that our company is involved in solar gardens. That's, 5 to 20 megawatts of smaller projects. Beyond that is what you're describing, like kind of rooftop and distributed generation. It's a totally different business that we're not in. We're in the utility side of the business, but also the CSG side of the business. Anything below CSG is more along the lines of rooftop community focused solar generation.
And like you said, those projects you did over East and Wood County, that soil type permitted that, because if it was pulp, it don't grow very good corn, beans, or whatever. So that was a good fit for that
And by
application.
the way, because of what we mentioned earlier about all these plants being shut down, all of the above. I used to work for one of T. Boone Pickens' companies, and he was a big believer, obviously an oil and gas man, but he was a big believer in renewable energy, and believed that we should be doing everything domestically sourced, meaning power generation, of course.
Can I speak to the board?
It's not technically a public hearing, but, yeah, we
Can I
can,
speak?
for discussion purposes, yeah,
I don't mind it if that's okay.
let's go for it.
My name is Fred Kristen.
You want it, Mike?
Please come up to the podium.
My name is Fred Kristen. I'm on Tracy Valley Road, which is adjacent to the property that they're gonna put these solar panels on. I would like each member of the board here to think about, would you want those solar panels in your front yard? I would like to go around and ask each one of your board members if you would be okay with having those solar panels in your front yard. And it's gonna be in my front yard, it's gonna be in his front yard, it's gonna be in his front yard. Well, I would like to know from the board members here, would you want that solar panel in your front yard?
No, sir.
Sir, would you tell me, would you want that solar panel in your front yard?
It would not be the desirable location for
This
a
is,
solar.
I would like to make a slight objection
We
here.
can't-
These
yeah,
these
no.
panels
No.
aren't, these panels aren't going in anyone's front yard.
Oh, yes,
They
they
are
are.
not
Okay.
going in anyone's front yard, sir.
I think at this point,
That is
this
a
isn't a
false
public
argument.
hearing, Fred, and I definitely understand where you're coming from. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily disagree with you, so if we're gonna go down that kind of road, then.
Okay,
I'm just gonna stop.
I wanna talk about the tax base too.
Okay.
I want to talk about the tax base, which affects all of Trempealeau County. Our property values are gonna get devalued if we're adjacent to this solar farm.
There's no
So-
evidence of that, sir.
I can guarantee you, is his property sitting in the middle of the solar field gonna be, not be devalued?
I guarantee you, sir, I could provide evidence that suggests that these projects have been built throughout the country, and there's no evidence to suggest what you're claiming. Zero. If you could provide some, I'd love to see it.
Well, we don't necessarily believe everything that you're telling us, because this is a for-profit organization you're doing here.
And sir, forgive me, most of the time when I have people that are very passionate about not wanting these projects to continue, generally, it's because you talk about profit motive. Generally, a lot of folks that are most vocal about these projects are not getting compensated for it. They feel like they're not gonna personally benefit from it. But as I mentioned earlier, the tax base is gonna generate significant revenue from this on a regular basis. And as Mark mentioned earlier, the interests of the county should not be confined to a township. The whole county should benefit from it.
Would you be excavating this site since we are land management? I mean, would there be excavation, or are you just gonna follow the contours of the site, the fields already? Or is there excavation, rock gonna be added, or what is the proposed development of this?
So the final, like I said earlier, the final site design hasn't been done, but generally, they try to follow the swale and the contours of the land, because it doesn't do us any good to have the panels underwater. So we also conversely don't want to dump water onto adjacent landowners, so we do have a water management plan as part of the permit Vegetation plan is part of the permit.
That doesn't exactly address, I don't think, his question, because that didn't, what he's asking, are we doing, would there be significant leveling to properties in order to
Or topsoil
accomplish this
removal, or-
project? Correct.
It will be designed in such a way that it conforms to the current swale and current topography as much as possible, because excavating or bringing in fill is expensive. So, and then wherever you have issues where discharge of water needs to be addressed, there'll be retention ponds, culverts, that type of thing. But this is gonna be a north of $100 million project. There's gonna be a lot of detailed engineering, which those results in those plans will be shared with you far in advance at the county level. And there'll be opportunity for county input and also public input as well. This is very early stages. As I mentioned earlier, we're probably closer to 3 years away than we are 2. And there'll be a lot of interchanges like this where the community can give input, you guys can give input. And then for this gentleman's example, if he has a concern about visual impacts, we can do, like we did for Wood County, pre and post kind of visual simulations. And he says, well, I don't want to see that. You know, we could do a berm, we could do tree breaks. There's so many different remedies we can do. As I mentioned, in Wood County, we left standing timbers around the project. There's lots of remedies to help address visual impacts.
Can I just, I'm part of the Rod and Gun Club. I was at every single meeting they had with the solar power thing here. And we were gonna go through with that. And I brought up at the Rod and Gun Club meeting, I brought up the fact that we should maybe talk to our neighbors. And that's exactly what we did. We had, I think, 3 different meetings with our neighbors. And what we got from our neighbors, this is the neighboring, the land that's adjoining the solar project. What we got from our neighbors is they did not want it. We come to a final vote. The vote was 40 against it and 1 for it. When we finally, we had 2 or 3 meetings at the Rod and Gun Club. And that's where the Rod and Gun Club stood, and that's why but we did not want them to go through that Rod and Gun Club because of that vote of our neighbors.
I wasn't at that meeting. I offered to be there. As you probably know, if you're a member of the gun club, this gentleman had asked a really good question. What were some of the things that were discussed? I wasn't there, so I wasn't ready to speak about it, sir. But as far as concerns of the neighbors, what were they in line with some of the things that I had mentioned earlier about pre-post testing, things that could be mitigated by pre-post testing?
There was a consensus there. They did not want that solar project there next door to them.
And what were some of the reasons given they didn't want it there?
One of them was visual.
Okay.
One of them was heat. That thing generates heat like crazy back into the atmosphere.
Sir, we can quantify that. That's something we can quantify and measure. Anything else?
Well, first of all, I don't want to be looking at it.
Understood.
I don't want to look at that thing.
Understood.
I've been living there since 1969, and a taxpayer, been paying taxes here forever. I'm 81 years old. It's got nothing to do with money for me.
Sir, there's
I'm
lots of-
81 years old. What I'm worried about is my grandkids.
Sir, there's lots
That's
of-
what I'm worried
There's
about.
lots of people that are disinterested in looking at the mining equipment that's out here, the mining infrastructure that's out here. But it provides for the community like this would.
This is providing nothing for the community visually. You're
You're
telling me this
you're
is a
switching
beautiful
subjects,
project?
Sir, you're talking
I
about
think,
visual impact.
let's stop this at this point. We're
Yep.
not gonna gain the ground.
Okay,
with this.
I just wanted the board, and I thank the board for listening to me.
Yeah.
And
there'll be many more
there
opportunities.
will be
for you to give
opportunities in the future for public
Thank you.
exchange like this.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions for Mark? And this will not be the only time we see him, I'm sure.
No.
I have one more question.
One more question.
Oh,
Sure.
Sorry.
Go for it.
So I've been hearing more about community solar, and it sounds like your company doesn't handle things at the smaller scale like that. But do you see that becoming more of a trend, just going forward? Just because we do have some people that are.
We do community solar, And we do utility solar. We just don't do rooftop type of solar like you'll see on a barn or on a municipal building. We don't do that. But to answer your question, I think it's all important and they all play a role. And even, I mentioned earlier, I work for T. Boone Pickens. Natural gas has a role. It's quick cycle on, quick cycle off. Peaker plants and natural gas have a role. Heck, even oil has a role. As long as it's domestically sourced, we need to be pursuing it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
If there's not any further questions on that, I think we will, thank you for coming, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Thank you, thank you. And one more thing. If any of your constituents have similar types of concerns about heat islands, property values, I have lots of information I'm going to provide you with. As a matter of fact, I'm in the process of assembling information booklets that have a lot of the information on solar and have retorts and peer-reviewed studies to a lot of the concerns that you'll commonly hear about these types of projects.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
All right, thank you.
We appreciate that.
Our next item on agenda is directly related to solar as well. And that is beginning a discussion on solar farms and possible ordinance updates, a discussion of possible action. All of this ties back to a study that was done by some of our fellow solar committee members. I know it was Kurt, John, Randy, Tony, myself, Andy, you was on, yeah, you were on the solar panel, study panel.
Oh, no, that's right.
Oh, so anyway, so there's a number of us that were quite involved with that, and so all that report was sent out to committee members once again for review, as a basis for what we've learned, and hopefully everyone has had a chance to at least take a peek at that. Basically, the next steps are, like, where do we go from here? What are we gonna use as our parameters to guide us? And, move forward in some sort of manner.
Can I ask
Kurt?
a quick question for the,
Go for it, Stacy.
sorry, is Susan still there?
She is.
I am.
Okay, but I'm not sure if this exactly something you, but when we read through from Clark County, is that what they were able to, that's what they put in? 'Cause I thought it was okay, if it's 100 megahertz or above, then that's the PSC, and
Sure.
we don't have really much say in that, but this is where they were able to have some say?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head regarding that particular ordinance, and I don't want to speak too much on another county's ordinance, as we are Trempealeau County. Clark County can do what they want. But as a brief glance, there was not a distinguishing between the 100 and above megawatts as well as those that were lower. And that would be just a very glaring issue when trying to enforce that type of ordinance.
Yeah, you may.
Thanks.
I think you're talking about the documents that I sent to you from Clark County, the ordinance.
Could have been.
Yeah, so in that document, they break it down into greater than 100 megawatt, and then like community solar, something like 5 megawatt to 100, and then residential. So they pick all three sections. Maybe we're talking about apples and oranges. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I recall seeing that for Columbia County.
Oh, okay.
I don't recall that for Clark.
I got
know-
my counties mixed up. You're right, it was Columbia.
That's okay. And, Columbia County, Clark County, I believe Clark County's ordinance is several years old. Columbia County's ordinance is very new. So. It has been passed. I have connections to Columbia County, and I contacted their zoning administrator as well as their corporation council, and it passed within the last week or two. So I certainly would be happy to speak to the committee about that. As I said, I had some connections to that. Supervisor Kellen had asked me to provide a brief presentation. I will try to be very quick. I know we have had a long meeting already. And some of this you already know. So I am going to try to share my screen. just gonna try to minimize my chiclets, so I'm sorry that you see that way up on the top. I'll move it to the bottom. Hopefully that'll eventually catch up on your screen. So we're gonna talk about solar projects today. As I believe multiple supervisors have mentioned, you guys have already done quite a bit of work on this, so my job or my goal is just to provide really a brief overview of the county's authority and talk about what are some considerations for moving forward. And we just went through that, so we're gonna jump straight to county authority. Counties are interesting creatures when you look at them, because counties are really creatures of the state, and we are arms of the state, and what we can and cannot do are that power is defined by the state. Sometimes people like to think that counties have lots of power. We have some. So I want to point out directly where we are limited. The first is from the Wisconsin Constitution. If you see that, if you want to read that section, I would point out that we are limited, and that's referring to the counties, that we are directly limited by the legislature. So what we can and cannot do is not, we cannot do everything. We can do some things. The second reference is just to the establishment of the county system. I would also note that Wisconsin statutory chapter 2 is where there's the division of the state of Wisconsin into the counties. I think more importantly, though, is chapter 59. Most county staff are fairly familiar with 59, certainly the administration, probably the county board as well, because that provides the law for what counties can and cannot do. There's often a large discussion about home rule that comes up certainly for planning and zoning. It comes up in other contexts though, but what I want to point out is that last line. Our administrative and organizational powers are still subject to the Constitution and the legislature. And that brings up the issue of preemption. And that's the principle of law. It's a legal principle. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. Sometimes it happens with larger cases across the country. And that's where a higher body of law ends up preempting a lower body. So an example would be a federal law that supersedes a Wisconsin law, a state statute that would supersede whatever ordinance. And the effect is that you cannot regulate in that area. So if the issue is preempted, the lower body cannot regulate. One thing that I would point out, and a key question when we are looking at whether something is preempted, is it and I'm sorry, there's a typo, it should be a statewide concern. And whether the issue or the proposed ordinance is a statewide concern. The below is the 4-factor test, what you use to analyze that. There are other cases that do include that test. I use the ATC case because that is directly within this area, but there's a whole large body of law that is applicable. So turning to this particular project, and I know some of you are very well versed in this, and so some of this is going to be old hat to you. I wanted to first tell you where you could find the definitions of solar for solar energy systems, but where are other sources of law? Certainly Chapter 196 is important. 66 is very important, which is a municipal law section. In particular, for what the county can and cannot do, I would strongly recommend paying close attention to Wisconsin Statute 660401, which we will break down in just a moment. Wisconsin Statute 660403 is important because that provides some greater protections for those who are actually, they're using solar and blocking to reduce solar blocking. So it allows some protections for those individuals. As I mentioned, Chapter 13 is in there. The admin code is important, especially when we're talking about the Public Service Commission or the PSC, but there are lots of administrative code that applies. We're talking about the DNR, we're talking about DATCAP. This is not just exclusive to one state administrative agency. And I would also recommend not forgetting case law. which I did highlight several times in the presentation. When we're talking about solar in general, key question is what's its size? Is it over 100 megawatts or is it under 100 megawatts? Those that are over 100 megawatts are pretty much regulated by the PSC. Most of the authority is going to go directly to the PSC. I included ATC versus Dane County again for your reference. I also shared a reference to Wisconsin Statute 196-41 because I think it's important to know. It says if an installation or utilization of a facility for which a certificate of convenience, which is issued by the PSC, and necessity has been granted is precluded or inhibited by a local ordinance, the installation and utilization of the facility may nevertheless proceed. So regardless of what the ordinance says or does, if it is preempted through the PSC's actions, it's going to go forward. And so that.
Over 100 megawatts.
That's over 100 megawatts.
We have no control, we understand.
The next part I mentioned, though, is to pay particular attention to 660401, and I will talk about the case law with this because they're dual. 660401 is a statute that regulates wind as well as solar. This particular section first provides that no subdivision, so no governmental entity, including a county, may put on a restriction that is greater than what the PSC requires. However, we also cannot put on anything greater, we cannot put on anything unless it satisfies one of these conditions. Serves to preserve or protect the public health or safety, does not significantly increase the cost of the system or significantly decrease its efficiency, or allows for an alternative system of comparative cost and efficiency. And one thing I would closely pay attention to is that there is some very significant case law that deals with those provisions, and if they are not reviewed, the county is going to potentially have some real significant issues. And Ecker Brothers is the clearest one, especially when looking at it in terms of the report. The facts of Ecker Brothers versus Calumet County. As I mentioned earlier, wind is also regulated under 660401. So this is involving a wind turbine. However, it's the same law. It's the same issue. Calumet County enacted an ordinance establishing minimum setbacks, height, noise levels for wind systems. Those requirements were uniformly established. There was no case-by-case analysis. This was part of what they put into their ordinance. Ecker Brothers, who wanted a wind turbine, ended up eventually challenging it. I would note that the county also put in a moratorium on wind as part of what it was trying to do, all of which were unsuccessful. In the Court of Appeals opinion, and this is precedential to our county, it's precedential in this matter in general. Calumet County was found to have lacked the authority to establish its one-size-fits-all regulations. So its setback requirements, its height, its noise requirements, its uniform establishments were deemed excess of authority by the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals specifically said that for any time there is a matter, and it's typically going to be coming to a county through a CUP process, the county is required to look at each one on a case-by-case basis. So it is not allowed to just establish right off the bat, nope, in our county, we can't have X, Y, Z. You got to look at it one by one, which is basically what I just summarized there. But if it's enacted, if there is a universal regulation, it will be deemed as void. I did mention ATC earlier. And I included another case in the packet. Those are other important cases, but I think today's discussion, I think probably Ecker Brothers is the most important one. One thing I would note, though, is that even if the county wanted to adopt a permit process that was exactly the same as the PSCs, we can't do so. That was one of the conclusions from this particular case, because it creates another impediment. So really what I'm looking for is to talk about where we're at and look for next steps. And I think I may have mentioned it, but the county's done a lot of the work. You guys have done a huge amount of work when you created this solar report. Back in 2022 to 2023, there was a committee established. As a result of that committee, a report was created. In March 2023, there was a resolution that was brought to the county board. I think that's important to review. I don't know if, I don't believe it's probably, I know you received it, but I don't believe it's up. The resolution itself was relatively short and brief, but the therefore statement says, now be it resolved that the attached solar farm study report be implemented by the Environment and Land Use Committee. That was voted on by the county board. So that's already been adopted. So the next question is, what do we do with it? Looking at the report itself, the way that it's drafted, it's fairly clear, and I don't know if any of you have it. I know you have it in the packet. If you go to, I believe it's page 19, might be, it's different on the PDF. It's near the end. It's what's the top of it would say Part 2 policy recommendations. The focus of this is largely on agreements, and it does not deal with CUPs, which is something that I want to talk about. That is a current process that Trempealeau County has. It is a statutory process as well. As you can see, there's quite a few policy considerations in there. There are some that I would have recommended. And I would recommend these for many types of CUPs. I would recommend, and this is where a decision might be needed from the committee, should they so choose to adopt the recommendations, and these are just recommendations, that there's a timely notification of any change of ownership to the county. As there was a discussion today that it could change between owners, I believe that the county should be timely notified, and we can flesh that out with more specificity in any agreement or condition of a CUP, but I think that's a requirement. I would also request that copies of all permits are included with the application so that the county has them in their files, that we have the proof of the insurance or the bonding or whatnot to be included, that there's a demonstrated access, and I'm talking about road access, and the relevant permitting and approvals for such access are included in the permit. For all of these projects, there will be at least some sort of access that's needed. And it might be a town, it could be the county, I'm not sure, because I'm speaking broadly, but I would like to see that kind of consideration. Also, I just think as a general standard that compliance with all applicable state and federal laws should be included. It's just kind of a catch-all. I recommend that generally.
Susan, may I?
Sure.
The gentleman here said the bonds didn't kick in till after 10 years because the value and everything's there. What if a storm comes through and blows, I assume the insurance company would clean that up or whatever, but when does that bond take effect? How much do we set it at? Do we have any authority to set the value on that?
I think that's more, those are very good questions. I think those are more through negotiations than having
So as long as it's stated in our ordinance?
Well, I wouldn't say that in our
policy?
ordinance, in your policy.
That's what's confusing to me or whatever.
Yeah.
Because we can't, what I'm hearing and what I understand is that we cannot do a uniform ordinance for this. So policy guidelines, I think, is what we need to establish.
Yeah, and one of my questions down the line is what would the county board like to do with these? These are these types of negotiations are difficult. They're not easy to go through. They are not public. How, what do you want to do? Do you want just staff involved? Do you want one person from the county board involved? What kind of things are you looking at? That's a tough question, but I want to throw it out there before there's an issue down the line.
I'd say there should be one from this committee, the county board, a township, or whatever municipality is affected. I mean, there should be a board of 6 or 7.
And one thing I would say is that we're talking about contracts between the county and a potential developer. So
Correct.
not necessarily the town wouldn't be part of that. The town would have
Well,
their
the
own.
towns are under county zoning, so why shouldn't the town be involved in that?
Well, what I'm hearing is that you might be a volunteer.
Nice shot.
So these,
Somebody's gotta speak for the towns, I guess.
these,
But then he says, that's what this committee is too, though.
yeah. And in case it's coming up, my office doesn't make policy. That's what the committee is, that's what the board does. The county board is already delegated through the resolution process, the ability to make the policy here. So that's why I'm throwing these out. These are additional policy considerations I would recommend, just in case anybody's wondering why I'm having this type of conversation publicly. Additional recommendations not included. I'd like to see, and there could be some tinkering with this, but I'd like to see some sort of provision of relevant agreements or consideration of relevant agreements, including with other municipalities and governmental units. I strongly recommend whenever there is a large amount of construction road use agreements, that should not be a shock for anybody who is aware of what my practice is. But I think if you have many trucks
So are
come,
we gonna go by the current PASER reports, or however you're gonna establish a baseline prior construction and then during or whatever, or how?
it's a really good question. So one way that you could do it is, I mean, you could look at that, but my experience, and I had the benefit of working with an engineer on staff who could go out and was knowledgeable in that and take all of the information. We had it, and then had it as part of our record. I think that would have to be tinkered out because I don't think we have that benefit here. But just as a consideration. These are more clarifications, but I want to throw them out there. And I was glad to hear that there was some consideration a few moments ago. And I will say some of this is somewhat considered here, but just some additional clarifications, and to the extent that they're policy, and I think these are policy. I think that this needs to be considered by the committee. Considered noise and site mitigation, a promotion of green technology and green practices. With public safety and emergency medical services, encourage the provision of any additional training to those staff and personnel that might be needed. I think this was raised, this committee is very much concerned about using highly productive farmland as a possible consideration for any negotiation, to include some sort of provision of maintaining that topsoil at least on the property. And so, again, these are policy considerations, these are negotiation aspects, but something to throw out there. Any sort of additional drainage infrastructure that's required, or water management, water plan as well.
Do we have a real property value protection plan on any of this? Like, say it gets appraised before, or multiple appraisers to see where a starting point is or where it could be?
I think that would be hard for the county to enforce across the board. That's something,
Right, I just want to comment that we went down that road during the mining, and we opted to stay out of that.
Stay out of that? Because I know there's some other townships that have done that to try to protect.
Yeah.
It's really tough. We don't want to get.
No, because it's there's steps. If one step fails, then there's step 2 and there's you get more dragged out and involved, but to me, there's got to be some protection there for neighboring properties that don't participate. I know it's a gray area, but it's our job. It's not pleasant all the time.
So my question, and it goes back to that resolution, is how would we like to use this report? What does implementation mean? You know, as I look at the report, I think it's pretty clear that the use of the report, the policy considerations that are expressed in the report are considered for, you know, whether it's a joint development agreement or a development agreement, that part has been done. As I said, there's some additional things that could have been included, so that's one thing to consider. One thing that I didn't see as clearly within the report is whether there is also a similar goal to include or consider these policy issues when implementing a conditional use permit process. So when you have something, again, under 100 megawatts, it's probably going to come to the county as a CUP, and it will be coming here eventually. But is that something that the committee wants to do? And both are technically possible. I jumped ahead a little bit, but there is a reference to the JDA. That is a term that can be used in this matter. I also want to point out the conditional use permit process. As I mentioned, it's already in place. We don't really need to amend our ordinance, and it's already in the statute. What we really would need is just more of that policy aspect of it. The reference there is to the statutory language within 5969. I would note that denials have to be based upon substantial evidence. You guys have probably gone through that previously, but I do want to just point that out there, that aesthetics is not something that can be considered expressly within the statute. Trempealeau County zoning ordinance 10.04 also could be utilized. Again, it's already in place. It would require, or excuse me, well, it would require that the committee reviews it on a case-by-case basis procedurally. As we note, our ordinance also has to mirror state law or consider state law, so we cannot have a uniform prohibition or regulation. And so that really gets us to the next steps, and I'm happy to clarify. Again, I'm looking for, you know, what does the committee want to do? We can't have a uniform prohibition. You have already taken the steps to adopt this policy. How do you want staff to implement it, especially for these smaller projects?
If I can, just a clarification, maybe my hearing aid failed me. Just a couple minutes ago, did you say aesthetics could or could not be? Could not
be.
Okay.
I believe I copied and pasted, could not. Yeah, it's, I believe, expressly written into that provision for CUPs within Wisconsin statutes.
I didn't hear which, that's all.
Yeah.
Thoughts, questions?
Just maybe, amending that study report to include some of these suggestions that
I mean,
Susan had.
would that be the right way to go about it?
That would be one.
Amend the report.
Or to additionally include them, yep. And I just want,
State now that if there's excavation, it must require a mining permit? Or is that something that would be considered depending on how much they'd be excavating, the area? I mean, you're leveling out a 40, taking 4 feet off one side and filling in, or maybe not? He said following, he didn't answer my question.
No, he didn't. He dodged it every
He
chance
dodged
he
it pretty
could.
close he could, and I've heard,
I don't think it would require a mining permit, but he did mention that it would, you know, the DNR, stormwater plan, all that kind of stuff would require some kind of permit for any ground disturbance, you know.
but that don't give us really
If you go
any
over an
teeth.
acre, you know, our erosion control ordinance, I wouldn't say is null and void, but it gets kicked up into the stormwater with the DNR. I guess I have a question with Susan. We went through all these recommendations. You know, and the first part of your talk was that we can't really hardly do anything, you know. Can we do these recommendations, or can we do these recommendations? I mean, what happens if they say we don't care about your recommendations, we want to just do it? I mean, what?
That's a good question.
I mean,
That
what
gets
am I-
to the heart of it and the
I
heart
mean, we
of this.
can, I'm not saying it's a waste of time trying to find a way to address all this, but if we really can't, I mean, what do we?
That's
I
why
mean, it'd
I
be
think-
in their best interest to follow some of the recommendations for sure. I mean, that would be just good neighbor policy, but some of them might not want to, you know, and we're,
So the statutes are very limited
right.
in this,
That's kind of what I gathered out of it. It sounded like we,
and case
I don't
law
want to say we
limits
can't
it
do
further.
anything, but I guess, you know, the recommendations are all nice, but push comes to shove, they're recommendations, not requirements, I guess.
So one thing that, you know, we are county employees. We implement the policy of the county board. I don't, as I have said, and I'm not gonna, you know, sugarcoat it, it's gonna be difficult to try to implement it, but that doesn't mean we can't try to implement the policy. And this is policy. This isn't law. This isn't ordinance. This isn't, obviously, it's not statute. So.
So question, in a nutshell, big solar farms can come in and we can't do nothing about it, basically? Okay, that's what I'm kind of getting at.
Boil it all down, there's not a lot.
There's not a lot we can do about it.
Without
so-
being put liable
Right.
for trying to block.
Okay. I
And the
mean,
county's liable. and-
I just think our Trumbull County, as our residents, need to hear that and know that. I mean.
No, I think it needs to
not
be
much-
said point blank.
Yeah, point blank is what can we do as a county board? I mean, it's.
That's a good question, yeah, and it clarifies it. There's very little that we can do under state law. I think the committee's report and all of their work was really good, because it clarified that, because what we can do is attempt to negotiate. And that is either through factors as a CUP or in some sort of agreement.
And that would be in our best interest at this point to be able to pursue those things.
That's what they identified, local impact. So I got a question, what's gonna override money, revenue to the county versus our constituents' property values or morals or what they live here for or whatever versus, you start looking at some of the financial impacts that these projects are bringing for revenue for the towns or the county, what supersedes what?
I would, I'm gonna give my
No, you can go.
non-legal perception, that it doesn't matter. It does not matter.
It should not matter.
No, I'm saying it doesn't matter because the state has taken away the right for it to matter.
On a large scale, but I mean, you're looking
Even
here.
on a smaller scale, would you disagree that under 100 is not wholly different
Right.
than over 100?
So even under 100, we still have to go back to those provisions in 660401M. And if we were going to deny it, we would have to have substantial evidence that the denial is based upon one of those three conditions.
If we
So-
failed to provide that evidence, what could or would happen to the likely scenario?
That's a really good question. It is very, there's a good potential that the county could get sued and lose on that if we did not have that substantial evidence.
So that's where we're at.
Can I talk?
Yeah, please.
So, Tony, I feel like I have deja vu here because all of this came up with all the mining hearings. It was the same thing. And as you know, they did deny one conditional use permit and went all the way to the state of Wisconsin, Supreme Court, and we won. And that, if I remember correctly, I'm not sure this was the whole thing, but I think their basis was there was some kind of microorganism in the wetland that could not be replaced.
One thing I would point out is that they changed the statute afterwards.
Right, I know, and they changed the statute because of us, because of
2007,
Trumbull
correct,
County.
2007, because of Trumbull
Right.
County, it
Right.
got
They
changed.
made it harder.
But, you know,
Yep.
to my point, we do have the conditional use permit process in place. We do have the conditional use permit process in place.
Okay.
That provides a public hearing and a public forum for people to voice their concerns. we can discuss all of these points that are in the conditional use, and then Susan has added some more, which are basically the points she made this morning about conditional use. I don't think it's a bad thing to bring that to a public hearing, conditional use-wise, and address those issues.
I think it's absolutely a good idea,
But
at minimum.
But most of these, their public hearing is at a library. That's the whole premise of this, why these people didn't know anything till March. Nobody knew anything was going on because the leases are secretive. It's not brought to a public meeting before initiation. That's the premise. So how do we get a public hearing?
Well, you could always petition a state to change your rules.
I think that's the way to fix it.
Because of the green energy movement. Got killed.
They thought we were going to lose at the state, too. Trempealeau County's always been the rebel.
Yep, so we gotta keep your assets around here for a little bit longer with all that knowledge so that we can fight this. Yeah.
So,
Any amendments to the policy or?
yeah, I mean, if we want to, obviously, this will not be resolved today. Nope. This was information that needs to be digested, and we'll come back. Steps for next month, I don't know if it's continued discussion as to what, should we add those things to our report that has already been completed? You know, add a few things to our policy. What policy do we want to add? Is it safe to say maybe that would be a good step to put on next month's agenda? Okay. All right. Anything else? Yeah.
In one package.
Could you, present and edited?
I think we can do that. I know that Verge has already started on that, and we can work on that over the next
Yeah.
couple of weeks.
If we could do that and have something, I agree. It's nice to see something of what it might look like.
Right,
Then we can cross off and add.
Could, Susan, could we, have you email us your presentation?
Yes.
Because there were a lot of new things on there, and that
Yep.
was kind of fast.
Yep, I can do that.
Okay. Okay, anything else we'd like to do for moving forward for next month? Otherwise, we will move on to our next agenda item, number 10. Zoning update, discussion, possible action. Thank you guys all for attending.
Thank you very mught, guys. We
Yep.
appreciate letting us.
We'll keep notice of what's going on out there. Just watch for things.
It's a pretty hot topic up there.
Very much so.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. All right, zoning update.
Well,
Mark and Verge.
well, yeah, let's just call it quits. But no, next month, there's an individual that wants to be on our agenda, that we changed the ordinance specifically for this individual for the railroad thing, remember that? Evidently, he's found something wrong with it, and him and his attorney want to be on next month's agenda. And I guess, this and this transfer density thing is a glaring thing of why we even change ordinances in the first place. You just leave them alone, and that way, I mean, we've done a lot of changes in the last couple of years just because one or two people but every change is brought by someone's concern, So that's one thing. Coons Trucking, the sawdust mill thing in Arcadia. There's neighbors still grumbling about that, and it does state that we would bring it back if there was some concerns. But every time I go there, I don't see the concerns, I guess. So speaking on their behalf, I said at least bring it up and, follow through it with the best we can. And then an individual called in regards to, he's bidding up some apartments in the city of Galesville. And he's getting socked pretty good with fees for construction inspection. because he's going through the state. You know, they want us to consider, like, we took in UDC inspections for 1 and 2 family dwellings. We are the designated person, or not person for it, but party for it, and we hired out GEC. They want to see us do that with commercial. You know, whether we want to get involved with commercial is a whole debatable thing, but I guess in order for that to happen, we'd have to do something similar to what we did when we adopted the policy for contract for UDC for 1 and 2 family dwellings, so. And I was my understanding the city of Galesville in this case didn't want to do it. They want the county to do it. Well, there's always somebody else that wants somebody else to do it, I guess. But, you know, like the city of Blair has a specific contract with GEC to do their inspections. I believe even for commercial with electrical only. And that's what this citizen's concern was. And Andy can pipe in here too, because he's talked with this individual too. But, I mean, he's getting socked thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for inspections that, you know, if the city or the county or even adopted to be the authority, or it would cost less. And why, I have no idea, because it's the same company doing the inspections, but something to do with the state, and it's just, you know, and,
No, I think the state is doing the inspections, because GEC only does the electrical. So if it's construction, the state is doing the
well,
construction.
he gave us some bills from GEC,
Then that would be electrical.
yeah. So, I mean, it's just something to consider, you know, that, I mean, I don't know how much more involved with, if we want to just stay the course of 1 and 2 family dwellings or start getting involved in commercial inspections. I mean, they got like fee schedule just like everything else, you know, and I don't think the inspections would be a whole lot different. Right now, we would just permit the building and say, okay, you can go build it. And this way, if we considered it, it would just be another thing. I'm not saying it has to be GEC, but I use them as an example, you know, because the guy gave me a whole list of names because he apparently was not even thrilled with GEC's inspection costs, so. But he had talked with Andy too, and he probably talked to him more about it than with me. I mean, I talked to him very briefly.
Yeah, and he's talking, you know, I didn't, of course, research it with how the contracts and stuff are working, but he was talking between him to get his, through this contract, like Blair was doing, it's $500 or something per unit, or per whole unit. And through GEC is like $20,000 to $30,000 for inspections. They can charge what they want. If you don't like it, this is what I was told. Okay, I'm talking, if you don't like it, then don't build, is what he was told. And I guess what I was told, again, is the gentleman who used to work for the state, who now does something with GEC, I'm not sure about that through inspections and stuff, inspection process, so he knows what's going on, so he can charge as much as he wants if we don't have some kind of a contract set up like we do. And how I understand it, again, Blair, all it would take is us to contact the Secretary of Blair, and it's a simple thing to do. I don't know how simple it is, okay, I just don't.
I mean, I was told it was simple too, but
Right,
nothing
right.
simple, but I guess, I says, well, we simply don't want to assume responsibility for anything either. you know?
Right,
And
right,
then he
so-
says, well, he basically said that we would have to contract out like we're doing with, but then we'd have to have a fee schedule that we all agree on, and that would be the fees, and I don't know how that would be different than, I mean, how would it be the best interest of the inspection company? Oh, since the county signed on, we're only gonna charge this much, and then all of a sudden, if they didn't sign on, they're gonna charge this much. I don't understand how they can do that, but yeah, we're talking a lot of money, you know, but I mean,
Yeah, you're talking a lot
but
of
he
money.
said it was simple, but I was like, oh, there's not
Maybe
many.
we should look into that simple, is what I'm thinking.
I mean, it might not be a bad idea.
I mean,
To look into it, that was my question too, you know, if we're contracting with the same agency as the state, why would it be cheaper for
Us to do it.
for us to do it? That didn't quite fit. So, and then the
I
next
mean, I can
step,
look
the
up
next step in that
he
would
did
be.
send some information, and I didn't look at it all yet, because he just sent it a couple days ago, but he did send Blair's information, and,
The next step in that is they tell us what they want in their next contract for
Which
the services,
is
and
up
we
anyway.
adjust our fees accordingly. So
some ways now's the time,
You
if we
know,
were
or
to go.
the only
down that road.
possibility is that we could look at other agencies for
Yeah,
competitive
I mean, I
bidding,
guess
or competition to see if
I
anything
mean, I
works
don't think it
better.
would hurt to shop around. I mean, I'm happy with GEC, but the only way I'm not happy with them is because I've been reaching out to get our contract figured out, because it expires at the end of next month, and it's like pulling a tooth. I mean, I'm like, can't simply respond back and say this is fine and this is not fine, because they gave us the inspection fees that increased, but they didn't increase pretty minimally. And then we would just adjust our fees accordingly. We're not gonna lose, but then we know there's some language that was added to the contract that wasn't in the original, just little minor little things. And I mean, I've emailed the person half a dozen times with maybe they're playing games and wanted it to expire, but I mean, I don't know what else to do with the guy.
With what you've just said, I mean, if they're expiring next month, we don't really have an option what are we gonna do a month after next when it's
Well,
expired?
it's getting to be,
I mean,
quite
is there something
serious, you know,
council
and I
can
mean,
do for us?
I mean, I think it'd be nice just to be able to have the contract signed and maybe not maybe limit the term of the application, you know, since this is how they handled it this time, don't get sucked into something for multiple years.
Maybe we're best off to finish, either do a, 5-month or a 17-month.
Or
Yeah.
do, or
And
do
do
a
it for an end
a
of
month to
year.
month contract until one side, or something like
Right.
that, till this gets resolved, and unless they step up to the plate and.
I think it'd be nice to not do a month to month, just so that we all know that there will be services provided.
Yeah,
Well,
But,
yeah, that's the scary part,
that's
is all of a sudden
true,
there
yeah.
isn't.
yeah,
But I mean,
All
as
of a
far as
sudden.
the inspectors go, I mean, they're really good to work with. Kyle, as far as I'm concerned, he's fine, you know, and I work with plumbers too, with septics, none of them say anything bad about him, you know, they all like him, and it's just, I kinda wish it would just stay the course, it's just a matter of officially getting it on paper.
right.
Well, Kellen, the reason this gentleman's very passionate about what he's doing. I have no doubt in my mind he's not, pulling the truth out of what he's saying. Two is we're talking about trying to get housing in our area. I mean, Trempealeau County. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, this poor guy is paying 30,000
He's
to
trying
get
to
an
help.
inspection. He's trying to help put these apartments up. And he said, I can't build this thing for that kind of a fee for my electrical. So, I mean, we got to look at something.
Well,
I think.
there is reason for us to investigate.
It's in the city of Galesville, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have jurisdiction in the city of Galesville for zoning and stuff, you know.
Right. So are we saying we should just push it on Galesville, or what? I mean, I'm not sure.
That'd be for them, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, my personal view would be, it'd be nice if the city of Galesville would do what the city of Blair did with the commercial part of it. We do 1 and 2 family dwellings in the city of Galesville. We have an agreement with them for that, but not commercial, and he had talked to the prior regime of the city council, and they said, no, that's too much like work. Well, who knows how much they really looked into it,
Right.
and, I mean, I'd be willing to reach out to, I want to get our 1 and 2 family dwelling contract secured before I worry about other stuff, but we can always add in commercial if we had to,
I think we can continue
Right.
the discussion of it, and
Yeah, and, I just told him I would talk to him about it, and he, like Andy said, he's pretty passionate about, they're really socking it to him, and it certainly sounds like it. I mean, it sounds like the mafia's running that joint or something. I mean, it's like, I don't get it, I mean.
It really does.
I mean,
Anything else? There's one.
That's it for the zoning update, I guess. I don't wanna,
okay.
there's always something to talk
Well,
about.
keep
for
working
zoning,
on
but-
the, particularly the contract, we need to get that resolved. Haley, conservation update.
Okay. I'm going to just maybe quickly, share my screen here so that you guys can see the tree and shrub stuff and the land judging. So sorry that came out a little later. Things got a little crazy. Okay, so as far as our tree and shrub, I know it had been a little bit here back in May, and I just wanted to get you the final numbers as we went through Square this year. Overall, total to be included with our, for the tree and shrub program is gonna be just over $2,000. We had, which, you know, prices of trees, they're just more. I don't wanna charge a total arm and a leg for the service. So that's where we're sitting as of right now, as far as like adding to that fund. And then just a kind of quick visual here as far as the, you know, total number of trees, total number of orders, they are going up, and actually getting, you know, probably back to where, it was prior to like COVID and when Verge was doing it, she really got her rolling, so. So just as a, you know, visual, so I just wanted to bring that to you guys as well. So that's just a quick tree and shrub update. I will jump over to land judging. So that was held also in May, right after the committee meeting. It went really well. We had 5 schools participate and almost 60 kids this year. That is an increase from last year with only 3 schools and about 30 kids last year. So we almost doubled our participation, which is really exciting. And we had a absolutely beautiful day. It was sunny and probably like 65 or, you know, it was beautiful. So it worked out really well. And the scores are on there as far as the team scores. So as far as senior, Arcadia took first, and then junior, Whitehall took first there. So, and then the individual scores, Arcadia did really well, and Whitehall also did. So we want to send out a huge thank you to all of our volunteers that day that, you know, we wouldn't have been able to host and do all of that without our volunteers from NRCS. Kevin Whalen was there to help out. And we also had the highway department. They donated their time to dig the pits and fill them back in. And then a huge shout out to the landowners, which is, you know, Jamie and Shane Goplin, that allowed us to be on the farm, dig up parts of their, you know, crop area so that the kids could really actually get in and do the competition. So huge shout out to them, and the Whitehall FFA to provide breakfast for them. So this is also part of that tree and shrub fund. It helps fund these types of programs. So that's why we keep offering that, you know, tree and shrub service in order to help fund our youth education. So just wanted to highlight that. So we were really excited. We'll hold it again next spring. So I don't remember the location. We rotate through the county, so we'll look at what the next one is going to be coming. So we'll be looking for another host location. So quick other things here is I'm gonna do just a plug for the cover crop application. That is due July 15th. So if producers are looking for fund or cost sharing on cover crops, we are looking for applications on that. July 15th, there's a link online, otherwise reach out to Rick and he can get that to you guys. Conservation projects, waiting for some dry weather. Last year we were waiting for a little bit of rain to install some things, now we're waiting for it to dry out a little bit. But with the rains, all of our phones have been ringing like crazy because there is definitely some washouts happening. People are concerned, which is very valid because there's a lot of water coming through our county right now. So we are doing a lot of field visits, site visits, going out and just seeing what we can do and going from there. So we may be having another slew of cost share requests be coming here in the next couple months, and even potentially getting it for maybe next year, getting things ready to roll. So we're rolling with that stuff. Next is the area meeting. The Western area meeting was held June 18th. It was myself, Stacy, and Tony. We attended the meeting, and that was in Sparta. Overall, I thought it was a great meeting because we were able to chat with the area conservation departments and other committee members from those other counties. So that was really a highlight for me, and just to see how the different roles play in as far as like the committee versus the department. I do have some LCC LCC handbooks, the Land Conservation Committee handbooks, for you guys as well. It kind of goes over what the roles are, what the timelines are, how it got established. I mean, it has all kinds of great information, so I can pass those out after. I don't know if either Tony or Stacy has any comments on, what they thought, so I'll
It's
just,
very good and informative. They're very, very well organized.
Yeah, I agree. And it was interesting to learn, the different roles and how we can all work together. And I mean, just some of the items that were pointed out by different members, seeing what else is going on throughout, that whole area that they cover. So I think it was really good. I learned a lot.
so I appreciate you guys coming, and it was good to have committee members there. And, if that's something in a future meeting we want to discuss a little bit further of what, committee is looking, what kind of roles, look at the handbook, we can kind of discuss that further. I know we're getting a little long today. So last thing for me is a few upcoming events. The Buffalo Trempealeau Farmer Network, they will be having a field tour, so they're actually going to be doing a bus tour on August 22nd. That date was finalized last night at the meeting, and they're still finalizing all the details as far as times and locations, but we will be a part of that. So I just wanted to get that date on the calendar if anyone would be interested. They're looking at interseeding, cover crop, a whole host of different things. There will be a meal with that as well. So the other thing is Trout Unlimited, along with Buffalo County and Trempealeau County, we will be co-hosting a stream restoration education event for landowners with streams and rivers on their property. That is August 29th, so pretty much a week later from the BTFN. That will take place on Swins Creek in Buffalo County, which is right outside of Arcadia on Highway C. More details on that. It's going to be like a lunchtime one. Again, there's going to be a meal for that. I think it's like tentatively 12 to 2, just as like highlighting what landowners can potentially be doing with their streams and doing restoration work with different agencies, including, us, NRCS, Trout Unlimited, Rod and Gun Club. So we're just trying to get the word out there. So that is what I have. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Very good. Just keep up the good work. A lot of good things happening, so. All right.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Future agenda items beyond what has been discussed during meeting today. So we still got a few things to finish up, I'd say, so.
I just want to make one more point on the zoning update, that Susan and I are working with a couple individuals that are historically junk violation people. So if you get any calls from people that feel they're being, whatever, mistreated, I think they've had plenty of times to do their thing. And with Susan's support, we're finally getting some teeth on some of this stuff. And so thank you, Susan. And then, so someone might be calling one of you people on the committee that they're being picked on or something. Well, they're not really being picked on. They've had opportunities, many opportunities, and now it's substantial incentive to get it done, or you're going to pay the price. So, and we're going to do that with future ones also. But
Good to know. Okay. Anything else for future agenda items? Next meeting date, we are set up for Wednesday, August 7th. Is that good with everybody still? 8:30? Stick with our regular time. With that, I will adjourn the meeting at 11:39.